The stone floor was cold against her knees. So cold it burned through the thin fabric of her dress, but Kaya barely felt it. Pain had become a language she spoke fluently, a constant companion that whispered in her bones and sang in her bruises. The royal court stretched before her like the mouth of some ancient beast, all vaulted ceilings and marble pillars that seemed to pierce the very heavens, and she was the sacrifice dragged to its center. She kept her head down. Always down. That was the rule. The only rule that had kept her alive these past 3 years since her parents died and left her in the care of a man who saw her as nothing more than a burden with a heartbeat. The murmurs started before she even lifted her eyes. Hundreds of wolves packed into the grand hall, their scents mingling into something thick and suffocating. Judgment, curiosity, disgust. She could taste it all on her tongue, bitter as ash. They were here for a spectacle, and she was it. The girl with no rank. The orphan who couldn't even shift properly. The niece of Marcus Vrel, a man whose reputation as a loyal council member was as polished as the medals pinned to his chest. They didn't know what he was behind closed doors. They didn't know about the cellar, the chains, the days without food when she dared to speak out of turn. Nobody knew, and nobody would believe her if she told them. Her wrists ached where the iron manacles bit into her skin. They weren't necessary. She wasn't going to run. Where would she even go? The world beyond these walls belonged to wolves with power, with packs, with names that meant something. She had none of those things. She was a ghost in her own life, haunting the edges of a world that had decided long ago she didn't belong. The chains clinked as the guards yanked her forward another few steps. Her knees scraped against stone again. Fresh pain bloomed, sharp and immediate, and she bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. Don't cry.
Don't you dare cry.
Not here.
Not in front of them.
Above her, the massive windows let in shafts of gray afternoon light, weak and watery. Storm clouds had been gathering since morning, turning the sky the color of a bruise. The air felt heavy, electric, like the world itself was holding its breath. Or maybe that was just her. Maybe she'd forgotten how to breathe normally, how to exist in a space without making herself as small as possible. Her uncle stood 10 paces to her right, his posture rigid and perfect. Marcus Vrel was a man who understood the power of appearances. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old. His face was a mask of stern disappointment, the expression of a guardian burdened by an ungrateful ward. She'd seen him practice it in the mirror. He was good at this.
Lying.
Pretending. Painting himself as the hero of a story where she was the villain. The court recognizes Marcus Vrel of the Eastern Territories. A voice boomed from somewhere ahead. Kaya didn't look up to see who spoke. She didn't need to. The royal court operated like a machine, each piece moving in predetermined patterns. Accusations would be made. Evidence would be presented.
Judgment would be passed.
Her opinion on any of it mattered exactly as much as a mouse's opinion mattered to the hawk. Thank you, High Chancellor. Her uncle's voice was smooth, practiced, with just the right note of gravitas. I come before this esteemed body with a heavy heart. My niece, Kaya Thorne, stands accused of theft from the Eastern Territory Treasury. Multiple witnesses have come forward. The evidence is irrefutable. The murmurs grew louder. Someone behind her hissed a curse.
Thief.
The word would stick to her now, another layer of shame to add to the collection. It was a lie, of course. All of it. But Marcus had witnesses. He always had witnesses. People who owed him favors, who feared him, who would swear to anything he asked. What did she have? Nothing.
No allies. No proof.
Just her word against a respected council member's carefully constructed narrative. Her hands trembled in her lap. She laced her fingers together, trying to still them. Weakness was blood in the water here. They could smell fear, could taste desperation, and both would only make this worse. The High Chancellor's response was muffled, lost beneath the rushing in her ears. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape the cage of her body. Smart. If it could run, it should. Nothing good lived in this chest anymore. Just fear and exhaustion and a tiny, dying ember of something that might have once been hope. Stand, her uncle commanded. Kaya's legs shook as she pushed herself upright. The chains were heavier than they should be, or maybe she was just weaker than she used to be. When had she last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time had a way of blurring in the cellar, in the darkness, in the spaces between her uncle's rages. She stood, swaying slightly, and finally, she let herself look up. The royal court was even more intimidating from this angle. Rows upon rows of wolves in fine clothes, their faces ranging from bored to openly hostile. The council members sat in a semicircle on an elevated platform, 7 ancient wolves who held the fate of thousands in their gnarled hands. And above them all, carved from shadow and silence itself, was the throne.
Empty. No.
Not empty.
Occupied.
Kaya's breath caught. She hadn't realized anyone was sitting there. He was so still, so perfectly motionless, that he seemed like part of the throne itself. A figure carved from midnight and winter frost, draped in black that drank in the weak afternoon light and gave nothing back. She couldn't see his face clearly from this distance.
Just the sharp angle of his jaw.
The breadth of his shoulders. The way he sat with one hand resting on the arm of the throne, fingers drumming a slow, patient rhythm that somehow carried across the entire hall despite the murmuring crowd. The Lycan King. Every wolf in the territory knew the name, knew the stories. The king who had taken the throne at 22 after his father's mysterious death. The king who had crushed 3 separate rebellions before his 25th birthday. The king who had stood alone against the Northern Alliance's army and walked away while they burned. Ruthless, they called him. Merciless. A wolf who smiled while he killed and slept soundly afterward. And he was watching her. Kaya's skin prickled with awareness. She couldn't see his eyes from here, but she felt them. Felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing pressing against her chest, making it even harder to breathe. Why would someone like him even notice someone like her? Kings didn't concern themselves with the fates of orphaned thieves. She was nothing. Less than nothing. The evidence speaks for itself, her uncle continued, his voice rising with righteous anger. 300 gold coins, stolen from the territory's emergency funds. Funds meant to feed families through the coming winter. And for what? So this girl could. He paused, letting the silence stretch.
Well,
we found the coins hidden in her chamber, along with evidence of correspondence with wolves outside our territory. Another lie. So many lies they formed a tapestry, each thread carefully woven to paint her as something vile. A thief. A traitor. A girl so selfish she would steal food from hungry children. The story was good. She had to give him that. Marcus had always been creative with his cruelties. Have you anything to say in your defense? The High Chancellor's voice cut through the noise. An old wolf with a beard like frost and eyes that had seen too many winters. He looked at her with something that might have been pity, but pity was useless here. Pity didn't change outcomes. Kaya opened her mouth, closed it. What could she possibly say? That her uncle was lying? That he'd beaten her for 3 years while the world looked the other way? That he'd planted the coins in her room himself, had forged letters in her handwriting, had crafted this entire scenario because she'd finally worked up the courage to tell someone, anyone, what he was doing to her. Who would believe her? Her voice came out cracked, barely above a whisper. She tried again. I didn't. The blow came out of nowhere. One moment she was standing, trying to form words from the ashes of her courage. The next, her uncle's hand connected with her face with enough force to snap her head to the side and send her sprawling. The chains tangled around her legs as she fell, and she hit the stone floor hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. Pain exploded across her cheekbone. White light burst behind her eyes. The metallic taste of blood flooded her mouth. The court erupted in noise.
Shock.
Approval.
disgust.
It all blended together into a roar that seemed to come from very far away. Kaya's ears were ringing. Her vision swam. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. Everything hurt. Everything always hurt. That, her uncle's voice boomed above her, is for the disrespect you show this court with your lies. For the shame you bring to your family's name. 4. The temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual. One moment, the hall was cool but comfortable. The next, frost began forming on the stone pillars. Kaya's breath misted in the air. The moisture on her split lip turned icy. The noise died. Every wolf in the court fell silent, as if someone had cut their throats. The kind of silence that came before avalanches. Before disasters. Before death. Kaya managed to lift her head, blood dripping from her chin, and saw her uncle's face go gray. He was looking at the throne. The king was standing. Slowly. Deliberately. Each movement precise and controlled, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. He descended the steps from the dais, and the crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. No one spoke. No one moved. They barely seemed to breathe. He was taller than she'd thought. Broader. He moved with a predator's grace, each step measured and certain. The black clothing he wore seemed to absorb light, a long coat that swept behind him, tailored perfectly to his frame. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes were fixed on her uncle, and they were burning. Not literally. But Kaya had never seen such concentrated fury contained in a living being. It radiated from him in waves, making the air itself feel dangerous. The temperature continued to drop. Ice crystals formed on the windows. Someone in the crowd whimpered. The king stopped 5 paces from where Kaya lay bleeding on the cold stone. He didn't look at her. His attention remained locked on Marcus Vrell, who had gone so pale he looked like a corpse. When the king spoke, his voice was quiet.
Soft even.
But it carried to every corner of the massive hall, and it promised things that made grown wolves take involuntary steps backward. "Touch her again," he said, each word precisely enunciated, "and die." The silence that followed was absolute. Kaya's heart stopped, then started again, too fast, hammering against her ribs. She must have misheard, must have hit her head harder than she thought. There was no reason, no possible reason for the king to intervene, for him to threaten a council member, for him to defend her. But he stood there, a wall of controlled violence, and the look on his face said he meant every single word. Her uncle found his voice first. "Your Majesty, this is a family matter. My niece has committed crimes against. I did not ask for your explanation." The king's voice remained soft. Terrifyingly soft. "I gave you an order. You will not touch her. You will not speak to her. You will not look at her. If you so much as breathe in her direction, I will take your head from your shoulders and mount it on the gates as a reminder of what happens to those who test my patience." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. The High Chancellor stepped forward, his aged face creased with confusion. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, the girl is accused of serious crimes. If you have information that contradicts, she is innocent." The king still hadn't looked at Kaya. His attention remained fixed on her uncle, who was now visibly shaking. "The true thief stands before you. Marcus Vrell has been embezzling from the Eastern Territory for 6 years. The coins in question were planted in her chamber to deflect suspicion when his own crimes came to light." A collective gasp rippled through the court. Her uncle's face went from pale to flushed in an instant. "That's absurd," Marcus sputtered. "Your Majesty, I don't know what lies you've been fed, but—" "Commander Theron." The king's voice cut through the protests like a knife. "Present the evidence." A wolf materialized from the shadows at the back of the hall. Tall, scarred, with eyes like chips of amber and the bearing of someone who'd seen battlefields. He carried a leather satchel, which he set on the nearest table with a heavy thunk. 6 years of falsified records, Commander Theron reported, his voice crisp and military. Correspondence with black market traders. Receipts for personal purchases made with territory funds. Bank accounts under false names, all traceable back to Marcus Vrell. He pulled document after document from the satchel, spreading them across the table. And witness testimony from 4 separate individuals who were coerced into lying on his behalf, including 2 of the wolves who testified against the girl today. The silence was deafening. Kaya's mind spun.
How?
How did the king know? How did he have evidence? How did any of this make sense? Her uncle's mouth worked soundlessly. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the frigid air. This is someone has framed me. Your Majesty, please, you must. Take him. The king's voice was flat now. Empty. Somehow that was worse than the anger. He will await trial in the lower cells. No visitors.
No privileges.
Guards appeared. Strong wolves who grabbed Marcus by the arms and began dragging him toward the exit. He fought, of course. Screamed about injustice, about conspiracies, about his rights as a council member. His voice grew more desperate with each step, echoing off the stone walls. Kaya watched him disappear through the massive doors, watched the man who had made her life a living nightmare get dragged away in chains, and felt nothing. No relief.
No joy.
Just a vast, empty numbness that made her feel like she was floating somewhere outside her body. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. The king turned. Finally, he looked at her. Kaya's breath caught. Up close, he was devastating. Not handsome in any conventional sense, his features were too sharp for that, too predatory. High cheekbones that could cut glass. A mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. And eyes, gods, his eyes. Dark as midnight, flecked with silver like stars, and currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to melt into the floor. He crouched, bringing himself down to her level. The movement was fluid, graceful, nothing like the way other wolves moved. Everything about him spoke of leashed power, of violence held in check by the thinnest margin of control. You're hurt. His voice was different now. Quieter. Something almost like concern threading through the words. Kaya tried to speak. Her throat wouldn't cooperate. She managed to shake her head, a tiny movement that made the world spin dangerously. The king reached out, and she flinched. Couldn't help it. Too many years of hands that only brought pain. But his touch, when it came, was gentle. Impossibly gentle. He cupped her injured cheek with a hand that could probably crush stone, and his thumb brushed just below the split in her lip with the care someone might use handling precious crystal. Who are you? The words escaped before she could stop them. Barely audible. Definitely unwise. You didn't question the king. Something flickered in those midnight eyes. Recognition? Regret? It passed too quickly to name. Someone who should have found you sooner, he said, and there was a weight to those words that she didn't understand. A history she couldn't grasp. He stood, and Kaya immediately felt the loss of his warmth. The cold rushed back in, making her shiver. The king shrugged out of his coat in one smooth motion and draped it around her shoulders. It was absurdly large, heavy as armor, and it smelled like winter nights and something wild she couldn't name. Commander Theron will see to your injuries, the king said, his voice returning to that formal, controlled tone. But he was still looking at her, still watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. You will be given chambers in the royal wing. Anything you need only ask. He turned to address the court, and his voice rang out with absolute authority. Let it be known that Kaya Thorne is under the crown's protection. Any who harm her, threaten her, or speak ill of her will answer to me personally. This is not a request. This is not negotiable. She is mine to protect.
Mine.
The word echoed in the vast hall. In Kaya's mind, in her chest, where that tiny ember of something flickered. The wolves in the court bowed. Some looked confused. Others looked terrified. A few looked calculating, already trying to figure out how to use this information to their advantage. Kaya just stared at the king's back, at the rigid set of his shoulders, and wondered what game he was playing. Because powerful wolves didn't defend worthless orphans out of the goodness of their hearts. They didn't threaten council members over girls with no rank, no power, no value. Whatever his reasons, they had nothing to do with kindness. And everything to do with something she didn't yet understand. The king glanced back at her, just once, and something in his expression made her heart stutter. Recognition. Possession. A promise of protection that felt more like a claim. Rest now, he said, so quietly only she could hear. You're safe. But as Commander Theron helped her to her feet, as the court dissolved into chaos behind them, as she was led from the hall wrapped in a coat that smelled like the most dangerous wolf alive, Kaya knew with absolute certainty that nothing about her life would ever be safe again. She had caught the attention of a king, and wolves like him didn't let go of what they claimed. The storm broke as they reached the corridor outside the court, rain lashing against the windows in sheets. Thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the very foundations of the castle. Behind them, the king stood alone in the center of the empty hall, staring at the place where she'd fallen, where her blood still stained the ancient stone. And in the shadows at the back of the room, something moved. Watching. Waiting. Because the appearance of a king's protection was just the beginning. The real story, the dangerous one, the one written in prophecy and blood, was only now starting to unfold. The royal wing existed in a different world than the one Kaya had known. Where the cellars of her uncle's estate had been damp and suffocating, these corridors breathed with space and light. Tall windows lined the hallways, each one offering views of the mountain ranges that cradled the capital like protective hands. The storm still raged outside, turning the sky into a canvas of violent purples and grays, but inside, warmth radiated from somewhere beneath the floors, chasing away the chill that had settled into her bones. Commander Theron walked 3 steps ahead, his stride purposeful but not rushed. He hadn't spoken since they left the court, hadn't offered explanations or false comfort. Kaya appreciated that more than he could know. Words would have felt like lies right now. Everything felt like lies. The king's coat hung heavy on her shoulders, the hem dragging behind her like a shadow she couldn't shake. It smelled like him, that wild, untamed scent that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. Her wolf, who had been silent and small for so long Kaya had almost forgotten what it felt like to sense her presence. But now there was movement in that internal space, curiosity and something else. Something that felt almost like recognition. That was impossible. Her wolf didn't recognize anyone, didn't trust anyone, had learned the same hard lessons Kaya had learned about what happened when you let your guard down. They stopped before a door carved from dark wood. Intricate patterns worked into its surface that seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight. Theron pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter. The chamber beyond stole what little breath Kaya had left. It was massive. A bed large enough to sleep 4 people dominated one wall, covered in furs and fabrics that looked softer than clouds. A fireplace took up most of another wall, already lit and crackling with cheerful warmth. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, currently streaked with rain but offering what must be breathtaking views on clear days. There was a sitting area with chairs that looked more comfortable than any bed she'd ever slept in. A desk, bookshelves, a door that presumably led to a bathing chamber. This was a room for someone important, someone valued, someone who wasn't her. There's been a mistake, Kaya whispered, still standing in the doorway. I can't, this isn't for me. Theron's scarred face softened slightly. The king's orders were very clear. This is your chamber. There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit, though the servants will take proper measurements tomorrow for your own wardrobe. The bathing chamber is through that door. Healer Mira will be up shortly to tend to your injuries. He paused, something like sympathy crossing his features. You're safe here. I know that probably doesn't mean much right now, but it's true. No one enters the royal wing without the king's explicit permission. Safe. That word again. The king had said it. Now Theron. They kept saying it like it was supposed to mean something, like repetition would make it real. Kaya had stopped believing in safety a long time ago. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why is he doing this?
I'm nobody.
Less than nobody. What does he want from me? Theron was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. Finally, he said, "That's a question for the king, not for me. But I'll tell you this. I've served him for 8 years. I've seen him face down armies without flinching. I've watched him execute traitors without losing a moment's sleep. And I've never, not once, seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you in that court." He stepped back into the hallway. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." He closed the door, and Kaya was alone. The silence pressed in, broken only by the crackling fire and the storm's fury against the windows. She stood there, dripping rainwater onto expensive rugs, wrapped in a coat that wasn't hers, in a room that couldn't possibly be meant for her, and felt the numbness begin to crack. Her legs gave out. She didn't make it to the bed, or even the chairs. Just sank down right there in the middle of the floor, her back against nothing, supported by air and shock and the last threads of whatever strength had kept her upright in the court. The king's coat pooled around her like dark water. The sob that tore from her throat surprised her with its violence. Then another. And another. 3 years of held-back tears, of swallowed screams, of silent suffering, came pouring out in ugly, choking waves. She pressed her hands to her mouth, trying to muffle the sounds, but they kept coming. Her shoulders shook.
Her chest heaved.
Salt mixed with the blood from her split lip, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the enormity of everything crashing down at once. Marcus was gone. The man who had terrorized her, who had made her wish for death more times than she could count, was in chains. The king, the actual king, had defended her, protected her, given her this room, these clothes, this impossible safety. And she had no idea why. That was the terrifying part. Not the luxury or the sudden change in fortune, but the not knowing, the waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the real price to be revealed. Because nothing in life was free, especially not for girls like her, especially not for men like him.
Time passed.
The fire burned lower. The storm outside gradually weakened to a steady rain. Kaya's tears eventually ran dry, leaving her hollow and exhausted, staring at nothing. A soft knock at the door made her flinch. "Miss Kaya? It's Healer Mira. Commander Theron sent me to tend your injuries." The voice was female, gentle, without the sharp edge of judgment Kaya had learned to expect. She managed to get her voice working.
"Come in."
The woman who entered was older, maybe 50, with silver threading through her auburn hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She carried a worn leather bag and moved with the confident efficiency of someone who had spent decades dealing with wounds and worried patients. "Oh, sweetheart," Mira said softly, taking in Kaya's position on the floor, the tear tracks on her face, the blood crusting on her lip and chin. "Let's get you cleaned up, shall we?" She didn't make Kaya move to the bed, just settled herself down on the floor next to her, which seemed absurd, a royal healer sitting on the ground in her clean robes, but somehow made everything feel less overwhelming. Like if this woman could sit on the floor, maybe Kaya was allowed to fall apart here too. Mira worked in silence, cleaning the split lip, checking Kaya's cheekbone for fractures, running gentle fingers over ribs that were already mottled with bruises from the fall. Her touch was impersonal but kind, and she didn't ask questions about the older marks she must have been seeing. The scars on Kaya's wrists from chains. The fading bruises in various stages of healing across her arms and back. The evidence of 3 years written on her skin in violence and pain. "The king said you're to have whatever you need," Mira said finally, applying a salve to the split lip that smelled like herbs and stung only briefly. "That includes someone to talk to if you want. We have counselors, wolves who specialize in helping people who've been through difficult circumstances." Difficult circumstances. Such a polite way to say abuse.
Torture.
Survival. "I don't need to talk," Kaya whispered. "I just need to understand what he wants from me." Myra's hands stilled. She sat back, studying Kaya with those kind, ancient eyes. Has it occurred to you that maybe he doesn't want anything? That maybe he just saw someone in pain and decided to help? People don't do that. Not without a reason. Most people don't, Mira agreed. But then he's not most people, is he? He's the king. And from what I understand, he's been looking for something. Or someone. She closed her bag, the leather creaking softly. I've been the royal healer for 30 years. I served his father before him. And I've never seen him react to anyone the way he reacted to you today. Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than politics or games. You should rest. In the morning, things might make more sense. She left, and Kaya was alone again with questions that had no answers and a fear that felt different from what she'd known before. Marcus's cruelty had been predictable, almost reliable in its consistency. This, protection from a king, luxury she didn't deserve, attention she didn't understand. This was a different kind of dangerous. She should get up. Should use the bathing chamber, should try on the clothes, should sleep in that massive bed. Should do something other than sit on the floor wrapped in a stranger's coat. But moving felt impossible, so she stayed where she was and watched the fire burn itself down to embers. Kaya woke to darkness and the certainty that she wasn't alone. Her eyes snapped open, her body going rigid with instinctive fear. The fire had died completely. Rain still pattered against the windows, but softer now, almost gentle. And there, silhouetted against the faint light from the windows, was a figure sitting in one of the chairs. Watching her, her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She scrambled backward, the king's coat tangling around her legs, until her back hit something solid. The bed frame, maybe, or a table. Every muscle screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something other than lie there like prey.
Peace.
The voice was low, carefully controlled.
Familiar.
I didn't mean to frighten you. The king. He was here. In her room. In the middle of the night. This was it, then. The real reason. The price. Please, she whispered, hating how her voice shook. Please, I'll go. I'll leave tonight. Just please don't. She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the fear that had been her constant companion since Marcus first showed her what men with power could do to girls without it. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush her. Then movement, the king standing, and oh gods, he was even more imposing in the darkness, a shadow given form and purpose. But he didn't move toward her. Instead, he moved toward the fireplace, and a moment later, light bloomed as he coaxed the embers back to life with practiced efficiency. The growing firelight revealed his face, and what Kaya saw there made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. He looked wrecked, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. His hair was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His jaw was tight with tension. And his eyes, those midnight eyes, held something that looked almost like pain. You think I came here to hurt you? It wasn't a question. His voice was flat, carefully empty of emotion. You woke up, found a man in your room in the dark, and immediately assumed the worst. Kaya didn't answer.
Couldn't.
Her throat had closed around words that might have been explanations or apologies or prayers. The king's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with something that sounded like barely controlled fury. What did he do to you? Marcus. What did that bastard do that makes you look at me like I'm a monster? You're the king, she managed. Everyone says you're a killer, ruthless, merciless. Yes, I know what they say. He turned away, staring into the fire. Those things are true. I've killed more men than I care to count. I've made decisions that keep me awake at night. I've done things that would make most wolves sick. He looked back at her, and the intensity in his gaze was almost unbearable. But I have never, not once, raised my hand to someone weaker than me. I have never forced myself on anyone. And I sure as hell didn't come here tonight to hurt a terrified girl who's already been hurt far too much. The conviction in his voice was absolute, unshakable. And something in Kaya's chest twisted painfully because she wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly, it physically hurt. "Then why are you here?" she whispered. He was quiet for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his face that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I couldn't sleep," he finally said. "I kept seeing you fall. Kept hearing the sound of him hitting you. Kept thinking about how long you've been suffering while He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "I came to make sure you were all right. That you had everything you needed. When I found you asleep on the floor in my coat," something flickered across his face. "I should have woken you. Should have helped you to the bed. But you looked so exhausted, and I didn't want to frighten you more than I apparently already have." Kaya's mind struggled to process this. The king of all wolves, unable to sleep because he was worried about her. Sitting in her room in the dark, watching over her like,
"You don't even know me," she said.
"How can you care what happens to me?" His laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. "Don't I? What's that supposed to mean?" He moved then, but not toward her. Instead, he walked to the windows, pressing one hand against the glass, staring out at the rain-soaked darkness. "Do you know what a fated mate is, Kaya?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Fated mates. The stuff of legends and fairy tales. The idea that the moon goddess herself chose partners, binding souls together with threads that transcended logic or choice. Most wolves went their entire lives without finding theirs. Some didn't believe they existed at all. "Stories," she whispered. "Old legends that. They're real." His voice was flat, certain. "Rare, yes. But real. I know because I've been looking for mine since the day I took the throne. 8 years of searching, of hoping, of wondering if she even existed." He turned, and the look on his face made her heart stop. "And then today, in that court, I heard you speak. Heard your voice. And something in me just knew."
"No. No. No. No."
"That's not possible," Kaya said, shaking her head so hard her vision blurred.
"I'm nobody.
"I'm broken. I can't even shift properly."
I'm mean it."
The word came out fierce, possessive, and something in her wolf surged in response, a recognition she'd been trying to deny since the moment he'd crouched beside her on that cold stone floor. "You're my mate. My fated one. The other half of my soul. And every instinct I have is screaming at me to keep you close, to protect you, to tear apart anyone who's ever made you feel like you're less than the miracle you are." Kaya couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This was some kind of cruel dream, or maybe she'd hit her head harder than Mira thought, or maybe... "I can see you panicking," the king said, his voice gentler now. "I can see you trying to find the trap, the lie, the angle. There isn't one. This is just truth. Complicated, inconvenient truth that neither of us asked for." "You say that like it's a burden." The words came out sharper than she intended. Like finding your fated mate is some kind of problem to solve. His expression shifted, something that might have been self-loathing crossing his features. "Do you know what my life is like, Kaya? The politics, the schemes, the constant threats? I have enemies who would kill to hurt me, who would use anyone I cared about as a weapon against me. And now I find you, my mate, the one person in this world I'm supposed to protect above all others, and you're already broken. Already hurt. Already terrified." The words should have stung. Should have felt like criticism. Instead, they sounded like grief. "So this is about guilt," she said quietly. "You feel guilty because your mate turned out to be damaged goods." "No." He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, and before Kaya could retreat, he was crouching in front of her, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his eyes. "This is about rage. About the fact that the person I'm meant to spend my life with, the one the goddess chose for me, has been hurt so badly that she can't even accept comfort without assuming it's a prelude to more pain." His hand lifted, hovering near her face, but not quite touching. "May I?" She should say no. Should keep the distance between them. But something in her, something wild and desperate and tired of being afraid, made her nod. His fingers were warm when they brushed her uninjured cheek. Gentle, so impossibly gentle, like he was touching something precious. "I'm not him," he said softly. "I'm not Marcus, or any of the other wolves who've hurt you. I'm not going to hit you, or starve you, or lock you in the dark. And I'm sure as hell not going to force you into anything you're not ready for." His thumb traced a careful path along her jaw. "But I am going to protect you. I am going to make sure no one ever hurts you again. And eventually, when you're ready, I'm going to court you properly. The way you deserve. The way I should have been able to from the start." Tears burned behind Kaya's eyes again. What if I'm never ready? What if I'm too broken to be anyone's mate? Then we'll figure it out together. His smile was small, sad, but genuine. "I've waited 8 years to find you. I can wait as long as you need." The certainty in his voice undid something in her chest. Some locked door she'd been guarding, some walls she'd built to survive. It didn't come crashing down, that would take time, healing she didn't even know how to begin, but it cracked. Just a little. Just enough. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. The king's smile widened slightly. "Damien. My name is Damien." "Damien," she repeated, testing it. It felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. Real in a way that titles and formality weren't. "And you're Kaya." He said her name like it was something sacred. Kaya Thorne, who survived 3 years of hell and came out still fighting, still brave enough to stand in front of a court and try to speak her truth, even when she knew no one would believe her. His eyes held hers. "You're not broken. You're a survivor. And you're mine if you'll have me. Eventually. When you're ready." If she'll have him. Like she had a choice. Like he was giving her power in this, control she'd never had before. It was terrifying. It was the most hopeful thing anyone had ever said to her. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be someone's mate. How to trust. How to be in a room with a man without expecting violence." "Then we learned together." He slowly withdrew his hand, giving her space. "I'm not exactly an expert at relationships either. Turns out being a ruthless king doesn't come with a manual on how to court your traumatized, fated mate." The self-deprecating humor in his voice surprised a small, choked sound from her that might have been a laugh. Damien stood, offering her his hand. "Let me help you to the bed. You're exhausted, and sleeping on the floor isn't going to help those bruised ribs heal." Kaya looked at his outstretched hand. Strong, capable of terrible violence, but currently extended in offering. Not demanding, not taking, just offering. She took it. His fingers closed around hers carefully, and the jolt that went through her at the contact was electric. Her wolf surged, more present than she'd been in years, practically singing with recognition and something else. Something that felt like rightness. Damien felt it too. She could see it in the way his breath caught, the way his pupils dilated slightly. But he didn't comment on it, just helped her stand and guided her to the bed with the careful attention of someone handling something infinitely precious. The furs and fabrics were as soft as they looked. Kaya sank into them, and exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She hadn't realized how tired she was, how much the day had taken from her. Damien pulled the covers up around her shoulders, and the gesture was so unexpectedly tender that fresh tears pricked at her eyes. "Sleep," he said softly. "I'll be right here." Her eyes flew open. "Here? In this room?" "In the chair," he clarified. "I won't touch you. Won't come near the bed unless you invite me. But I'm not leaving you alone tonight. Not when you're hurt and frightened and probably expecting Marcus to somehow show up and drag you back to that cellar." He wasn't wrong. That fear had been lurking in the back of her mind since the moment Theron closed her chamber door. "What if people talk?" she asked. "About you being here. In my room." His smile was sharp, predatory. "Then they'll learn very quickly to keep their mouths shut. You're under my protection, Kaya. That means I decide what's appropriate. And right now, what's appropriate is making sure my mate feels safe enough to actually rest." My mate. The word sent a shiver through her that wasn't entirely from fear. Damien settled into the chair by the windows, his large frame somehow looking comfortable in the space. The fire had burned back up, casting warm light across the room. Rain continued its gentle percussion against the glass. Damien. Her voice was small in the darkness. Yes. Thank you. For today. For saving me. The silence that followed was weighted with things unsaid. Finally. You don't need to thank me for doing what should have been done years ago. But you're welcome. Now sleep, Kaya. Tomorrow, we start figuring out everything else. She closed her eyes, expecting to lie awake for hours with her mind racing. But between the soft bed, the warmth of the fire, and the presence of someone standing guard, someone who had promised not to hurt her and somehow, impossibly, she was starting to believe, exhaustion dragged her under. Her last conscious thought was that Damien's coat still smelled like winter and wildness, and her wolf was humming contentedly for the first time in 3 years. From his chair, Damien watched her sleep, watched the tension slowly drain from her battered body, watched the way she unconsciously curled around his coat like it was a lifeline. His mate, broken, terrified, convinced she was worthless. And his. The rage that had been simmering since he'd watched Marcus strike her threatened to boil over again. But he kept it contained, leashed, because Kaya didn't need his anger right now. She needed his patience, his protection, his willingness to let her heal at her own pace. He could give her that. He would give her everything. But first, he had questions that needed answers. Like how Marcus had gotten away with abusing her for 3 years without anyone noticing. Like who else knew and stayed silent. Like what the deeper story was here, because his instincts, honed by 8 years on a dangerous throne, were screaming that this was about more than one girl and one abusive guardian. Commander Theron would have answers. So would his spymaster. And when Damien had those answers, when he knew exactly who had failed to protect his mate,
Well,
there was a reason they called him Ruthless. The storm outside finally broke, leaving behind a clear, cold night where stars glittered like shattered diamonds. Dawn was still hours away. Damien settled deeper into the chair and prepared to keep watch. His mate was safe. Everything else could wait until morning. Kaya woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize and the disorienting softness of a bed that felt nothing like the thin cot in Marcus's cellar. For a confused, heart-stopping moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The court, the king, the impossible claim that she was his fated mate. She bolted upright, her ribs protesting the sudden movement, and immediately looked toward the chair by the windows. Empty. Of course it was empty. Morning had come, and with it, reality. Whatever strange, gentle version of the king had sat watch over her in the darkness was gone, replaced by the man who had more important things to do than babysit a broken girl who didn't know how to be anyone's mate. The coat was still there, though, draped over the back of the chair. Physical proof that last night had been real and not some fevered dream born of trauma and exhaustion. Kaya pushed herself out of bed, her body cataloging various aches and pains. Her cheek throbbed where Marcus had struck her. Her ribs were tender. Her wrists bore fresh bruises from the manacles. But underneath those new injuries, older ones made themselves known. The constant ache in her left shoulder from being wrenched too hard during one of Marcus's rages. The persistent pain in her lower back from too many nights sleeping on cold stone. The general, bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had spent 3 years in a state of constant vigilance, never knowing when the next blow would come. She made her way to the bathing chamber on unsteady legs, and what she found there made her want to cry all over again. The room was larger than her entire sleeping space in Marcus's cellar had been. A massive tub dominated one corner, already filled with steaming water that smelled like lavender and something else, something clean and fresh that made her throat tight with longing. Towels were stacked on a nearby table, soft and thick. Glass bottles lined a shelf, filled with oils and soaps in colors she didn't have names for. Someone had prepared this for her. had anticipated that she might wake and want to wash away the evidence of yesterday. Kaya stripped off the torn, blood-stained dress she'd worn to the court and caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked away immediately. She always looked away. But some masochistic impulse made her look back, made her really see what Marcus's 3 years of careful cruelty had done to the girl she used to be. The face staring back at her is hollow. Cheekbones too prominent, skin too pale, dark circles under eyes that had forgotten how to hold anything but wariness and fear. The split lip from yesterday was swollen, the bruise on her cheek already blooming purple and yellow. But those were new injuries. Temporary. It was the rest that told the real story. Her collarbone jutted out sharply, evidence of too many missed meals. Her ribs were visible, each one countable. Bruises in various stages of healing mottled her arms, her sides, her thighs, a rainbow of violence that chronicled every time Marcus had needed to remind her of her place. Scars marked her wrists where chains had bitten deep, again and again, until her skin had given up trying to heal smooth. But it was the mark on her shoulder that made her breath catch. Even now, even knowing what it was, she could barely stand to look at it. The brand was roughly circular, about the size of a coin, burned into the meat of her left shoulder. Marcus had done it 2 years ago, after she'd tried to run. Had heated a piece of iron in the cellar's furnace and pressed it against her skin while she screamed, while she begged, while something inside her broke in a way that had never quite healed. "So you remember who you belong to," he'd said, his voice calm and conversational while she sobbed on the floor. "So, you never forget what happens when you try to leave." The brand had gotten infected, had festered for weeks while Marcus refused to let anyone treat it, said she needed to learn her lesson. By the time he'd finally allowed a healer to see her, the damage was permanent. The scar tissue was thick, raised, impossible to hide. She was marked, branded like livestock. A permanent reminder that she'd been owned, that someone had hurt her badly enough to leave his signature on her skin. And now she was supposed to be the mate of a king. Supposed to be someone worthy of protection and care and courtship, Damien had said. Like she was something precious instead of something broken and used and irreparably damaged. The laugh that escaped her was bitter enough to burn. She turned away from the mirror and sank into the bath before the self-loathing could drag her under completely. The water was almost too hot, making her injury sting, but she welcomed the pain. Pain was honest. Pain made sense in a way that luxury and kindness and impossible claims about fated mates didn't. She scrubbed at her skin with a violence that probably wasn't healthy, trying to wash away more than just dirt and blood. Trying to scrub away the memory of hands that hurt, of hunger that gnawed, of darkness that pressed in until she couldn't remember what light looked like. Trying to wash away the girl Marcus had made her into and find some trace of who she'd been before. Kaya was 11 when her parents died. The memory came unbidden, rising from the depths where she'd tried to bury it. She'd gotten good at not thinking about them, about the before times when life had been different, safer. But sitting in this bath, in this impossible luxury, the memories forced their way through her carefully constructed walls. Her father had been a tracker, one of the best in the Eastern Territories. Not high-ranking, not important, but respected for his skills. Her mother had been a healer's apprentice, gentle and kind and always smelling like the herbs she worked with. They'd lived in a small cottage at the edge of the forest, and Kaya had been happy. She'd been so stupidly, blissfully happy. She remembered her mother teaching her about plants, about which ones healed and which ones hurt. Remembered her father taking her into the woods, showing her how to read tracks, how to move silently, how to listen to what the forest was telling you. And she remembered the night everything changed. Her wolf had come early. Most children didn't experience their first shift until 13 or 14, but Kaya had been 11. Just 11, still young enough to believe the world was a good place, still innocent enough to think that being special was something to celebrate. Her first shift had happened in her sleep. She'd woken up to her mother's scream, to her father shouting, to pain like she'd never imagined pain could be. Her bones had been breaking and reforming, her body twisting into a shape it wasn't supposed to take yet. And the wolf that emerged,
Wrong.
that's what everyone said later.
Wrong.
Her wolf had been pure white, which was rare, but not unheard of. But it was the other things that made people whisper. The way her eyes glowed silver instead of the normal gold or amber. The way the temperature dropped when she shifted, frost forming on the ground beneath her paws, even though it was summer. The way she radiated power that shouldn't have belonged to a child, to a low-ranking tracker's daughter, to anyone without ancient bloodlines or royal heritage. Her parents had been terrified. Not of her. They'd never been afraid of her. But for her. Because power like that drew attention. Made people wonder where it came from, what it meant, whether it was a gift or a curse. They'd gone to the pack elders for help. For guidance. For some explanation of why their daughter had manifested abilities that defied everything they knew about wolf genetics and magical inheritance. The elders had taken one look at Kaya's wolf and gone pale. She bears the mark of the old bloodline. One of them had whispered, and the fear in his voice had made Kaya's stomach twist even though she didn't understand what it meant. The frost wolves. The ones who were supposed to be extinct. Her father had demanded answers. What bloodline? What did this mean? Was his daughter in danger? The elders had been evasive, speaking in riddles and half-truths about ancient powers and dangerous legacies. But the message was clear. Kaya was something they didn't understand, couldn't control, and therefore feared. Her parents had left that meeting determined to protect her. They'd started making plans to move, to take Kaya somewhere safe where her wolf wouldn't draw the wrong kind of attention. They never got the chance. 2 weeks later, they were dead. A hunting accident, the official report said. A rogue bear, unusually aggressive, had attacked them in the woods. Their bodies had been found 3 days later, mauled beyond recognition. Kaya knew it wasn't a bear. Even at 11, traumatized and grieving, she'd known. Bears didn't hunt in pairs. Didn't coordinate their attacks. Didn't leave behind the scent of wolves, several wolves, that she'd caught on her parents' torn clothing. But she'd been a child. Powerless. Who would believe her accusations over the official story? Marcus had been her father's brother, her only living relative. The pack had given her to him without question, relieved to pass the problem child off to family where she could be properly supervised. Supervised. That's what they'd called it when Marcus started locking her in the cellar. That's what they'd called it when he forbade her from shifting, said her wolf was dangerous and unnatural and needed to be suppressed. That's what they'd called it when he started using his fists to teach her lessons about respect and obedience and knowing her place. No one had questioned it. No one had checked on her. The orphan girl with the strange wolf was Marcus Vrell's problem now, and everyone was content to look the other way. For 3 years, Kaya had survived by making herself small. By suppressing her wolf until she could barely feel her anymore. By learning to anticipate Marcus's moods, to read the signs of coming violence, to endure in silence, because screaming only made it worse. She'd almost forgotten what her wolf felt like, what power felt like, what hope felt like. Until yesterday, when a king had looked at her like she was something precious instead of something shameful. Kaya emerged from the bath feeling raw but cleaner, like she'd scrubbed away at least one layer of yesterday's trauma. She wrapped herself in a towel so soft it felt like a sin and made her way back to the bedroom. Someone had been in while she bathed. The torn dress was gone, replaced by a simple but beautiful gown laid out on the bed. Deep blue, like twilight, with long sleeves that would hide most of her scars. Undergarments that looked more comfortable than anything she'd ever owned. Soft slippers. There was also a tray on the table by the windows.
Food.
More food than she typically saw in a week. Fresh bread, butter, jam, cheese, sliced meat, fruit that must have cost a fortune this late in the season. A pot of tea that smelled like honey and mint. Kaya's stomach cramped with hunger so intense it was painful. How long since she'd eaten? 2 days? 3? Marcus had stopped feeding her regularly after she'd tried to tell one of the other council members about the abuse. Starvation was one of his favorite punishments, effective and easy to hide. She dressed first, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled on the unfamiliar luxury of clean, undamaged clothing. The dress fit reasonably well, though it was loose in places where she used to have more flesh. The long sleeves covered everything she needed covered, the bruises, the scars, the brand. Then she sat at the table and stared at the food, her stomach warring with her mind. Eat too fast, and she'd be sick. Her body wasn't used to regular meals anymore. But the hunger was overwhelming, a gnawing emptiness that made her lightheaded and shaky. She started slowly. Small bites of bread, sips of tea, testing her limits. The knock at the door made her jump so badly she nearly knocked over the teapot. "Miss Kaya? It's Commander Theron. May I enter?" Her heart was still racing, but she managed to call out, "Yes." Theron entered, and his amber eyes immediately went to the table, to her barely touched breakfast, to the way she was sitting with her shoulders hunched defensively. Something like understanding crossed his scarred face. "I apologize for interrupting your meal," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "The king asked me to check on you. He's been in council meetings since dawn, but wanted to ensure you had everything you needed." "I'm fine," Kaya said automatically, then realized how ridiculous that sounded. She was clearly not fine. No one who had lived through what she'd lived through was fine. Theron moved to the window, giving her space, not looming over her like Marcus used to. "His Majesty asked me to answer any questions you might have. About the court, about your situation, about anything." Questions. She had thousands of them, but the one that kept circling in her mind was the most dangerous. "How did he know?" she asked quietly. "About Marcus. About the embezzlement. How did he have evidence ready so quickly?" Theron was silent for a long moment, staring out at the mountain view. Finally, he said, "The king has been investigating Marcus Vrel for 6 months. We've had suspicions about corruption in the Eastern Territories for years, but the evidence was always well hidden. Then, about half a year ago, one of our informants mentioned Marcus had a niece he kept locked away. A girl no one ever saw." Kaya's blood went cold. "His Majesty ordered a deeper investigation," Theron continued. "We discovered the embezzlement, the falsified records, the coerced witnesses. But we also discovered you, the girl in the cellar, the unexplained injuries, the reports of a child with unusual abilities who had gone mysteriously silent." "He knew," Kaya whispered. "He knew what Marcus was doing to me. Not everything. Not the full extent. But enough to make him very, very angry." Theron turned to face her. "Do you know what he did when he read those reports? He spent 3 hours in the training yard, destroying practice dummies with his bare hands. Then he summoned me and said we were moving the timeline up, that he couldn't wait another week, another day, to get you out of that house. But the trial," Kaya said, her mind racing. "Marcus dragging me to court. That was a setup," Theron confirmed. "We knew Marcus would panic once he realized we were investigating. We leaked information that we'd found his hidden accounts, let him think he could deflect suspicion by framing you for something smaller. The trial was bait. And he took it, because men like him always underestimate the people they've hurt." Kaya couldn't breathe. It had all been orchestrated.
Planned.
Damien had known she was there, suffering, and he'd what? Waited? Let it continue while he built his case? "Why didn't he just come get me?" The words came out sharper than she intended. If he knew, if he had evidence, why did he wait? Why did he let Marcus keep hurting me? Theron's expression was pained, because going after a council member without ironclad evidence would have caused a political disaster. It would have given Marcus time to disappear, to destroy evidence, possibly to hurt you worse or kill you to eliminate the witness. The king had to be strategic. Strategic. The word tasted like ash. I was being tortured, and he was being strategic. Yes. Theron didn't try to soften it. And it's eating him alive. He made the choice he thought would protect you in the long run, but it cost you more suffering in the short term. That's what leadership is sometimes, making terrible choices and living with the consequences. Kaya stared at her hands, at the scarred wrists, at the trembling fingers. Part of her understood the logic, the necessity of patience, of building an unassailable case. But another part, the part that had counted every day in that cellar, every blow, every moment of darkness, that part wanted to rage at Damien for not storming Marcus's house the moment he knew she was there. "He's the king," she said quietly. "He could have done anything." "He's the king," Theron agreed. "Which means he has to consider the stability of the realm, the precedent he sets, the message he sends. If he'd acted rashly, without proper evidence, it would have weakened his authority, made it easier for other corrupt officials to hide behind their positions." He paused. "But you're also his mate. And that means he'll spend the rest of his life trying to make up for those weeks when he knew you were suffering and couldn't act fast enough."
Mate.
There was that word again. The impossible claim that kept feeling more real every time someone said it. What if I don't want to be anyone's mate?
Kaya asked.
What if I just want to be left alone to figure out who I am without someone watching over me, waiting for me to heal fast enough, expecting me to become whatever it is a queen is supposed to be? Theron's smile was small, sad. Then you tell him that, and he'll listen. Because despite what the stories say, despite his reputation as a ruthless king, he's also a man who understands that some things can't be forced. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I've never seen him like this. Uncertain, worried, desperately trying to do the right thing for someone other than the realm. You've already changed him, just by existing. He left, and Kaya was alone with her breakfast and her thoughts and the growing realization that her life had become infinitely more complicated. She forced herself to eat more. Small bites. Slow progress. Her stomach cramped and protested, unaccustomed to actual nourishment, but she persisted. Outside the windows, the capital city spread out in a tapestry of rooftops and streets. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, going to markets, working, laughing, existing without the weight of impossible expectations and traumatic pasts and kings who called them mate. Kaya touched the brand on her shoulder through the fabric of her dress. The raised scar tissue was always there, always present, a constant reminder of who she'd been, what had been done to her. Maybe that's all she'd ever be, the girl from the cellar, the broken thing that needed fixing. Or maybe, and this thought was so fragile she barely dared to think it, maybe she could be something more. Her wolf stirred, more present than she'd been in years. And for the first time in 3 years, Kaya let herself really feel that presence. The power that had terrified her parents. The strange, cold magic that had made the elders go pale. The abilities she'd suppressed for so long she'd almost forgotten they existed. The frost wolves, that elder had said. The ones who were supposed to be extinct. What did that mean? What was she really? And why had someone killed her parents to keep her from finding out? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. But underneath them all was a truth she couldn't deny anymore. She wasn't just some random orphan Marcus had abused. She was something more. Something important enough that a king had been searching for her. Something dangerous enough that people had been willing to murder to keep hidden. And now she had a choice. She could stay small, stay broken, let the fear win. Or she could start asking the questions that terrified her. Start looking for the answers everyone seemed desperate to keep hidden. Start becoming whoever she was supposed to be before Marcus and grief and 3 years of darkness had stolen her chance. Kaya finished her breakfast, her hands steadier now. Outside, clouds were gathering again, threatening another storm. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid of the thunder. She was too busy being angry. And anger, she was beginning to realize, might be exactly what she needed to survive what came next. 3 days passed in the royal wing like a dream Kaya kept expecting to wake from. Each morning, she found breakfast waiting. Each evening, someone came to check on her. Healer Mira, Commander Theron, once even a kind older woman who introduced herself as Lady Evelyn, the head of the king's household. They were gentle with her, patient, never pushing too hard or asking questions that cut too deep. But Damien himself never came. She told herself it didn't matter. Told herself she should be relieved. The king had council meetings and diplomatic matters and a realm to run. He couldn't possibly spend his time hovering over a broken girl who didn't know how to be anyone's mate. But late at night, when sleep eluded her and the darkness pressed in with memories of the cellar, she found herself listening for footsteps that never came. Found herself touching the coat he'd left behind, breathing in that scent of winter and wildness that made her wolf hum with recognition and longing. It was pathetic. She was pathetic. 3 years of abuse should have taught her not to depend on anyone, not to expect comfort from people who had power over her. Yet here she was, missing a man who had sat in her room one night and made promises he probably didn't intend to keep. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Kaya woke to find not breakfast waiting, but Lady Evelyn standing by the windows with an expression that managed to be both excited and apologetic. "Good morning, dear," the older woman said warmly. "I hope you slept well. The king has requested your presence for breakfast. In his private chambers." Kaya's heart stuttered. "His chambers? Nothing untoward, I assure you," Evelyn said quickly, reading the panic that must have shown on Kaya's face. "He simply thought you might be more comfortable in a private setting for your first real conversation, away from the court's prying eyes and wagging tongues." She moved to the wardrobe, pulling out a dress even more beautiful than the ones Kaya had been wearing. Deep green this time, like forest shadows, with delicate embroidery along the hem. "He asked me to help you prepare if you're willing." Willing? As if Kaya had a choice. As if refusing the king's invitation was even an option. But Evelyn's expression was kind, and there was no threat in her words. Just an offer. A question rather than a command. "All right," Kaya heard herself say. Evelyn helped her dress, her touch gentle and practiced. She did something clever with Kaya's hair, pinning it up in a way that was elegant but not too formal. Nothing that looked like she was trying too hard. When Evelyn finally stepped back to assess her work, she smiled. "Perfect. Not that you needed much help. You're lovely, dear. Even if you don't see it yet." She squeezed Kaya's hand. "The king's chambers are down the hall. 3rd door on the left. He's expecting you." Then she was gone, and Kaya was left standing in her beautiful room, wearing a beautiful dress, about to go have breakfast with the most powerful and most dangerous wolf in the realm. Her mate, supposedly. The thought still felt surreal. She forced herself to move before the fear could root her in place. Out into the hallway, past tapestries and windows and guards who nodded respectfully as she passed. 3rd door on the left. It was massive, carved with intricate designs that seemed to depict wolves running through forests under a full moon. She raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before her knuckles could connect. Damien stood there, and the sight of him stole what little composure Kaya had managed to gather. He wasn't wearing the formal, intimidating clothing she'd seen him in at court. Instead, he wore simple dark pants and a loose white shirt, the top buttons undone, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with old scars. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd recently bathed. And his expression, when he saw her, he looked at her like she was the first sunrise after an endless night. "Kaya," he said, and her name in his voice did things to her chest that felt dangerous. "Thank you for coming. I know this might be uncomfortable, but I needed to see you, to talk to you properly." He stepped back, gesturing her inside. "Please." She entered, hyper-aware of him behind her, of the door closing, of the sudden intimacy of being alone with him. His chambers were surprisingly modest for a king, larger than hers, yes, but not ostentatiously so. A sitting area with comfortable chairs. A desk covered in papers and maps. Bookshelves lined with volumes that looked well-read rather than decorative. And by the windows, a table set for 2 with enough food to feed a small army. "I didn't know what you liked," Damien said, moving past her to pull out a chair. "So, I had the kitchens prepare everything, apparently." There was something almost shy in his voice, a vulnerability that didn't match the ruthless king from the stories. Kaya sat, and he took the chair across from her, not at the head of the table, but facing her directly. Close enough to talk without shouting. Far enough that she didn't feel trapped.
"How are you?" he asked.
Really? I know Myra's been checking your injuries, but I'm asking about more than that. The question caught her off guard. Most people, when they asked how she was, didn't actually want the truth. They wanted the polite lie, the easy answer that didn't require them to do anything. I don't know, she said honestly. Everything feels strange, like I'm living in someone else's life. Because 3 days ago, you were in chains, Damien said quietly. And now you're here, in the palace, being told you're the mate of a king you've never spoken to before. That would make anyone feel disoriented. He understood. Somehow, impossibly, he understood. Why haven't you come to see me? The words escaped before she could stop them. These past 3 days, Lady Evelyn and Commander Theron have visited, but you... I wanted to, Damien said immediately. Gods, Kaya, I wanted to. Every moment. But I also knew you needed space. Time to process everything without feeling pressured or watched. And he ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. I didn't trust myself. Every time I thought about coming to your room, I remembered the way you flinched when I reached for you. The fear in your eyes. I was terrified I'd push too hard, too fast, and make everything worse. The honesty in his voice was almost painful to hear. You sat with me that first night, Kaya said. You stayed until I fell asleep. Because you were terrified and hurt, and I couldn't stand the thought of leaving you alone in the dark, Damien replied. But that was instinct, desperation, not rational thought. He leaned forward slightly. I'm trying to do this right, Kaya. Trying to give you the choice and the space I should have given you from the beginning, even though it's killing me to stay away. Something in her chest twisted at the raw admission. This man, this king who could command armies and destroy enemies without mercy, was trying so hard to be gentle with her, to give her power in a situation where she had none. I'm not good at this, she admitted. At talking. At being around people. Marcus, he made sure I understood that my opinions didn't matter. That speaking out of turn had consequences. Damien's jaw clenched, and for a moment, she saw the ruthless king beneath the careful gentleness. Marcus is never going to hurt you again. I promise you that. He's in the deepest cell we have, awaiting trial. And when that trial is over, he's never seeing daylight again. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel something she barely recognized. Safe. Valued. Like she was worth defending. Eat, Damien said, his tone softening. Please. I can see you're still not eating enough, and it's making my wolf extremely agitated. His wolf. The mate bond, presumably, driving him to care for her even when she didn't know how to accept it. Kaya reached for a piece of bread, more to give her hand something to do than from hunger. But once she started eating, the food was good enough that she continued. Damien ate too, though she noticed he was watching her more than his plate. Commander Theron told me, she said after a while, about the investigation. How you knew about Marcus before the trial. Damien's expression shuddered. I wondered if he would. Why didn't you tell me yourself? Because I'm a coward, Damien said bluntly. Because I knew you'd ask why I waited. Why I didn't storm in and drag you out the moment I knew what was happening. And I don't have an answer that makes me feel like anything other than a monster who chose politics over protecting his mate. The self-loathing in his voice was stark, genuine. Theron explained the reasoning, Kaya said quietly. About needing evidence. About protecting the realm. The reasoning was sound, Damien agreed. But that doesn't make it right. It doesn't change the fact that you suffered for weeks longer than necessary because I was being strategic. He met her eyes. I will regret that for the rest of my life. And I understand if you can't forgive it. Kaya didn't know what to say to that. Part of her was angry, would probably always be angry about those extra weeks in the dark, wondering if rescue would ever come. But another part understood that leadership meant impossible choices. That sometimes there were no good options, only less terrible ones. I don't know if I forgive you, she said honestly. But I understand why you made the choices you did. Something like relief crossed Damien's face. That's more than I deserve. They ate in silence for a while, but it was comfortable now rather than tense. Kaya found herself relaxing incrementally, her shoulders loosening, her breathing coming easier. Can I ask you something? Damien said eventually. Yes. You're Wolf. Commander Theron's reports mention that you have unusual abilities, that you shifted young, and that your wolf was different.
Can you tell me about that?
The question made Kaya's stomach knot. This was the dangerous territory. The thing that had gotten her parents killed, had made the elders fear her, had given Marcus another reason to lock her away. But Damien's expression was curious, not fearful. Interested rather than judgmental. I shifted when I was 11, she said slowly. Too young. And my wolf was, the elders called it wrong. They said I bore the mark of the old bloodline. Frost wolves, they called them. Supposed to be extinct. Damien's entire body went still. Frost wolves. You know what that means? I know the legends, he said carefully. The frost wolves were an ancient line, blessed or cursed, depending on who's telling the story, by the moon goddess herself. They had power over winter, over ice and snow. Could freeze enemies where they stood, could survive in conditions that would kill normal wolves. They were, he stopped, studying her intently. They were wiped out. Centuries ago. A purge led by wolves who feared their power. My parents went to the elders for help, Kaya said, the words coming faster now. They were terrified. Not of me, but for me. The elders took one look at my wolf and went pale. 2 weeks later, my parents were dead.
Hunting accident, they said.
But I smelled wolves on their bodies. Multiple wolves. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Frost began forming on the windows. Damien's eyes had gone dark, and the power radiating from him was almost suffocating. They killed your parents, he said, his voice deadly quiet. To keep you from learning what you were. To keep your power suppressed. I think so. And then they gave me to Marcus, who spent 3 years making sure I never shifted, never accessed whatever abilities I was supposed to have. He said my wolf was dangerous, unnatural, that I needed to be controlled. He was keeping you weak, Damien said, deliberately. Because a frost wolf at full power would be, he cut himself off, jaw working. This changes everything. What do you mean? Damien stood, pacing to the windows. The frost on the glass was spreading, creating delicate patterns that looked almost intentional. There's a reason I've been searching for you. Not just because you're my mate, though the goddess knows that would be reason enough, but because there's a prophecy, an old one, passed down through the royal line, about a frost wolf who would return when the realm needed her most, who would stand beside the king and help restore balance to a world that's been teetering on the edge of chaos. Kaya's heart hammered. That's ridiculous. I'm not some prophesied savior. I'm just a girl who can barely control her own wolf, let alone save anyone. You're more than that, Damien said, turning to face her.
You've always been more than that.
And the people who killed your parents knew it. Marcus knew it. That's why he worked so hard to break you. Because a broken frost wolf is just a girl. But a frost wolf who embraces her power. He moved closer, his eyes intense. You could be magnificent, Kaya. You could be everything they feared. The words should have felt like pressure. Like another impossible expectation being placed on her shoulders. But instead, they felt like permission. Permission to be something other than the terrified girl in the cellar. Permission to explore the power she'd been taught to suppress. I don't know how, she whispered. I've been pushing my wolf down for so long, I barely feel her anymore. Then we'll figure out together, Damien said. There are places, old places, where the magic still runs strong. Where you might be able to connect with what you're meant to be. He hesitated. If you're willing. If you want to know the truth. Did she want to know? Want to open that door and face whatever was waiting on the other side? Her whole life, people had made choices for her. Had decided what she should be, how she should act, what she was allowed to become. Her parents had hidden her abilities. The elders had feared them. Marcus had beaten them into submission. But maybe it was time she made her own choice. Yes, Kaya said. I want to know. I want to understand what I am. Damien's smile was fierce, proud. Then we leave tomorrow. There's a place, deep in the northern mountains. An ancient shrine dedicated to the moon goddess. If the legends are true, it will recognize you, help you access what's been locked away. Tomorrow? Panic fluttered in her chest. That's so soon. I know. But Kaya, the longer we wait, the more danger you're in. Now that you're here, now that people know you exist and that you're under my protection, there will be those who see you as a threat, who remember the old stories and fear what you might become. His expression was grave. The people who killed your parents didn't do it alone. They had help, maybe even orders from someone higher up, and those people are still out there. The fear was back, cold and familiar. So I'm not safe. Even here. You're safer than you were, Damien said. But truly safe? Not until you can protect yourself. Not until you have the power to face whatever's coming. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His fingers were warm, solid, real. I will protect you with everything I have. But I also need you to learn to protect yourself. Because I can't always be there. And you deserve to be more than someone who needs protecting. He was right. Some part of her that was slowly waking up, slowly remembering how to be brave, knew he was right. Okay, she said. Tomorrow. We'll go to this shrine. We'll leave at first light. Just you, me, and Commander Theron. No one else can know where we're going or why. Trust is a luxury we can't afford right now. They finished breakfast, talking about logistics and preparations. Damien was different when discussing strategy, confident, commanding, every inch the king he was supposed to be. But he kept glancing at her, like he needed to verify she was still there, still real, still his. When it was time for her to leave, he walked her to the door. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving this a chance. For trusting me enough to come here, to talk to me, to consider going on this journey. I know I haven't earned that trust yet. You're trying, Kaya said. That's more than anyone else has done. Something shifted in his expression. Before she could react, he lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Gentle, reverent, nothing like the painful grabs and violent touches she'd learned to expect from men. Sleep well, he said. Tomorrow we start finding out who you really are. He released her hand and stepped back, and Kaya fled to her chambers with her heart racing and her wolf howling something that sounded almost like joy. That night, Kaya barely slept. Her mind spun with prophecies and ancient bloodlines and the impossible idea that she might be something more than a victim, that she might have power, purpose, a destiny beyond surviving whatever cruelty the world decided to throw at her. Her wolf was more present than she'd been in years, pacing restlessly beneath her skin. Eager, curious, ready. When dawn came, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Kaya was already dressed and waiting by the window. Somewhere in the northern mountains, a shrine waited. Answers waited. And maybe, just maybe, the girl she was supposed to become waited too. She just had to be brave enough to go find her. The journey north took 3 days through terrain that grew increasingly wild and unforgiving. They traveled light, just the 3 of them on horseback, with minimal supplies and no fanfare to announce their passage. Damien had insisted on secrecy, and Kaya was beginning to understand why. Every village they passed through felt wrong. Not overtly hostile, but watching. Eyes followed them from windows and doorways. Conversations died when they approached, and more than once Kaya caught the scent of wolves who disappeared too quickly into shadows and alleyways. They know we're here, she said on the second evening, as they made camp in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines. The forest here was different from the manicured woods near the capital, older, deeper, humming with a magic that made her skin prickle with awareness. They always know, Damien replied, stirring the fire with a stick. Commander Theron was doing a perimeter check, leaving them momentarily alone. Word travels fast in wolf territories. A king traveling with minimal guard, heading north during winter? People notice. People wonder. And people who don't want me to reach that shrine will act, Kaya finished quietly. Damien's jaw tightened. If they're smart, they won't. But fear makes wolves stupid. And you represent something that a lot of powerful people thought was safely extinct. Kaya pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. The temperature had been dropping steadily as they traveled north, but it didn't bother her the way it seemed to bother the others. If anything, she felt more comfortable in the cold, more alive, like some part of her that had been sleeping was slowly waking to recognize its natural element. "Tell me about the prophecy," she said. "The real version, not the sanitized summary." Damien was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the flames. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older.
Wearier.
Finally, he began to speak, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting something learned long ago. "When the long winter comes and darkness rises from the forgotten places, when the throne sits heavy and the realm fractures at the seams, she will return. Born of frost and moonlight, bearing the mark of the Ancient Ones, she will stand beside the King of Wolves and choose the fate of all. Power enough to save or destroy. The choice will be hers alone." The words settled over Kaya like a physical weight. "That's vague. And terrifying." "Most prophecies are," Damien agreed. "But my father took it seriously. So did his father before him. For generations, the kings of our line have been searching for the frost wolf the prophecy speaks of. Some thought it was metaphorical. Others believed the frost wolves were truly gone, that the prophecy was just a pretty story." He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "But I always believed. Even before I knew you were my mate, I believed you existed. And I've been searching for you since the day I took the throne."
Why?
Kaya asked. "Why does it matter so much?" "Because the realm is fracturing," Damien said bluntly. "The old alliances are failing. Corruption spreads through every level of government. Marcus was just one symptom of a much larger disease. Rogue packs are increasing in number and boldness. And there are rumors of something worse. Something moving in the far north, in the territories we abandoned centuries ago. Darkness, the prophecy says. And I can feel it, Kaya. Something's coming. Something that will require more than military might to defeat." The fear in his voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. This wasn't just about a prophecy or destiny. This was about survival. "And you think I'm supposed to help you fight it?" Kaya said. "Even though I can barely access my wolf. Even though I have no training, no control, no idea what I'm doing." "I think you're supposed to become who you were always meant to be," Damien corrected. "And yes, I'm hoping that version of you will stand with me when the darkness comes. But Kaya, even if you couldn't fight, even if you were completely powerless, you'd still be my mate. I'd still protect you. Still want you by my side. The prophecy is important, but it's not why He stopped himself, jaw working. "Why you what?" He looked away, back to the fire. "Why I can barely breathe when you're not in my sight. Why I lie awake at night thinking about you alone in your chambers, wondering if you're having nightmares, wishing I could be there to chase them away. Why every instinct I have screams at me to keep you close and safe," and he shook his head. "The mate bond is strong, Kaya. Stronger than I expected. And it's taking everything I have to give you the space you need instead of following those instincts." The raw honesty stole Kaya's breath. She'd been so focused on her own fear, her own trauma, that she hadn't fully considered what this was like for him. A king who'd spent 8 years searching for his mate, only to find her broken and terrified and completely unprepared for any of this. "I don't know how to be what you need," she admitted quietly. "You don't have to be anything but yourself," Damien said. "The rest we'll figure it out. Together." The sound of branches snapping made them both tense. Commander Theron emerged from the tree line, his expression grim. "We have company," he said without preamble. "At least a dozen wolves, moving in from 3 directions. They're trying to be subtle, but they're not good enough. Damien was on his feet instantly, the gentle mate disappearing behind the ruthless king. How long? 10 minutes. Maybe less. Intentions. Nothing friendly, Theron said. I caught enough conversation to confirm they know who you are.
And who she is.
They're not here to talk. Kaya's heart hammered. This was it. The attack Damien had been anticipating. The pushback from people who didn't want her to reach the shrine, to discover her power, to become whatever the prophecy claimed she could be. We run, Damien said, already moving to kick dirt over the fire. The horses can outdistance them if we move now. They'll have wolves in front of us too, Theron warned. This is a coordinated assault. Running might just lead us into the trap. Then we fight. Damien's voice was cold, final. Kaya, stay behind me. No matter what happens, you stay behind me. I can help, Kaya protested. I can. You can survive. Damien cut her off, and the command in his voice was absolute. That's all I need from you right now. Survive. The wolves came out of the darkness like shadows given teeth. They were larger than normal wolves, well-fed and well-trained, with eyes that held too much intelligence to be rogue. These were pack wolves. Organized. Following orders. The leader was a massive gray wolf with a scar bisecting his muzzle. When he shifted back to human form, he was equally imposing, broad-shouldered, heavily muscled, with the bearing of someone used to command. Your Majesty, he said, his voice mocking the respectful title. Imagine meeting you out here. So far from your guards. So vulnerable. Garrick, Damien said, and Kaya heard recognition in his voice. I should have known. Tell me, does the Northern Alliance pay well for assassination attempts these days? Or are you just stupid enough to do this for free? Garrick's smile was cold. The Alliance pays very well. But this isn't about money. This is about protecting the realm from mistakes our ancestors tried to correct centuries ago. His eyes shifted to Kaya, and the hatred there was palpable. Frost wolves were eliminated for a reason. Their power was too great, too unstable. They couldn't be controlled. And this little girl, this broken, pathetic thing, you want to unleash her on the world? You're more fool than king. You don't know anything about me, Kaya said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Garrick laughed. I know you spent 3 years in a cellar because you were too weak to fight back. I know you're a scared little rabbit who jumps at shadows. I know that whatever power you might have had died in that cellar with your spirit. He gestured to the wolves surrounding them. You're no threat to us. You're barely worth the effort of killing. The words should have hurt, should have made her feel small and worthless, the way Marcus's words always had. But instead, something else happened. Anger. Pure, burning, righteous anger that swept through her like wildfire. Her wolf surged to the surface, no longer weak or suppressed but furious and ready. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread from where Kaya stood, racing across the ground in intricate patterns, climbing up the trees, making the air itself crystallize. Garrick's smirk faltered. Kaya, Damien said, his voice carefully neutral. Breathe. But she couldn't breathe, could barely think past the rage and the power that was pouring through her, 3 years of suppression breaking free all at once. The wolf inside her was screaming for release, demanding recognition, refusing to be called weak or broken or pathetic ever again. Stand down, Garrick ordered his wolves, and Kaya heard the fear in his voice now. Stand down. But it was too late. One of the younger wolves, either braver or more foolish than the others, lunged. Kaya didn't think, didn't plan, just reacted. She threw her hand out, and ice erupted from the ground in a wall so thick and tall it caught the attacking wolf mid-leap. He slammed into it with a yelp of pain and dropped, stunned. The clearing went silent. Everyone, Damien, Theron, Garrick, all the attacking wolves stared at the ice wall. At Kaya. At the frost still spreading from her feet like a living thing. I am not weak, Kaya said, and her voice sounded different. Stronger. Layered with power that made the air vibrate. I am not broken. and I am not yours to eliminate. Garrick recovered first, his face twisting with fury and fear. Kill her. Kill her now before she. Damien moved. One moment he was standing beside Kaya. The next, he was in front of Garrick, and his hand was wrapped around the larger wolf's throat. The king's eyes had gone completely black, and the power radiating from him was terrifying, ancient, absolute, the kind of dominance that made every wolf in the clearing drop to their knees in submission. You came here to kill my mate, Damien said, his voice deathly quiet. You organized an attack on your king. You allied with the Northern Alliance, a foreign power, against your own realm. He tightened his grip, and Garrick made a choking sound. Give me one reason I shouldn't tear your throat out right here. The law, Garrick gasped. You can't execute without trial. I'm the king, Damien said. I am the law. But he released Garrick, who collapsed to the ground gasping. Commander Theron, bind them. All of them. They're coming back to the capital to stand trial for treason. Your Majesty, one of the other wolves said, still on his knees, his head bowed in submission. We were just following orders, Garrick said. I don't care what Garrick said. Damien cut him off. You made a choice. You chose to attack your king and his mate. You chose treason. Now you'll face the consequences. Theron moved efficiently, producing rope from his pack and binding the wolves one by one. They didn't resist. The display of power, both from Damien and from Kaya, had broken whatever courage they'd gathered for this ambush. Kaya stood frozen, staring at the ice wall she'd created. It was at least 10 feet tall, thick as a castle wall, and so cold that the air around it shimmered. She'd done that. She'd called that power without thinking, without training, without even fully understanding how. And it had felt natural.
Right.
Like remembering how to breathe after holding your breath too long. Her hands were shaking. The anger was draining away, leaving behind exhaustion and a bone-deep cold that she could feel but somehow didn't mind. Kaya. Damien was there, his hands on her shoulders, his face close to hers. The blackness had faded from his eyes, leaving behind concern. Are you hurt? Did any of them touch you? She shook her head, unable to find words. You did well, he said quietly. You protected yourself. You showed them that you're not the helpless girl they thought you were. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I didn't plan it. I was so angry. And then the power just came. That's how it works sometimes, Damien said. Especially with abilities like yours. Emotion can be a trigger. But Kaya, you controlled it. You didn't hurt anyone who wasn't attacking you. You built a wall instead of lashing out. That takes skill, even if you don't realize it yet. I created a wall of ice, Kaya said, looking at her hands. I didn't even know I could do that. You can do so much more, Damien said. And now they know it too. Which means it's about to get much worse, Theron finished, walking over with his prisoners secured. Garrick won't be the only one who wants her dead. The Northern Alliance will see this as confirmation of their fears. And there will be others, in the court, in the territories, everywhere, who'll decide she's too dangerous to live. Let them come, Damien said, his voice hard as steel. Let them all come. They'll learn the same lesson Garrick just learned. But Kaya could see the worry in his eyes, could sense the way his body stayed tense, ready for another attack. This was just the beginning, the first of many fights. We can't go to the shrine now, she said. Not with them knowing where we're going. They'll send more, stronger wolves. We continue, Damien said firmly. We're less than a day away. If we turn back now, they win. And you don't get the answers you deserve. But, no buts. We continue, together. He cupped her face gently. You were magnificent, Kaya. Terrifying and powerful and everything they feared you'd become. Don't let them make you afraid of that. Don't let them convince you to stay small and hidden. His faith in her was overwhelming, terrifying. She didn't feel magnificent. She felt like a girl who'd gotten lucky, who'd lashed out in panic and happened to hit her target. But maybe that was enough for now. Maybe learning to fight back, even messily, even desperately, was the first step toward becoming whoever she was supposed to be. "All right," she said. "We continue." Damien's smile was fierce, proud. "That's my mate." The words sent warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with the way he looked at her. Like she was worth defending, worth believing in. They broke camp quickly, leaving the ice wall standing as a testament to what Kaya could do. Let it melt in its own time. Let anyone who came looking see the evidence and think twice about attacking. As they rode north through the darkness, Kaya felt her wolf settle beneath her skin, not suppressed anymore, but watchful. Ready. The power that had surged through her hadn't disappeared. It was there, waiting, a vast reservoir she was only beginning to understand. Behind them, bound and furious, Garrick and his wolves were forced to walk. They would face trial, would face punishment for their treason. But more would come. Kaya knew it with certainty that made her stomach knot. This was just the first battle in a war she hadn't known she was fighting. The shrine was close now. Answers were close. The truth about who and what she was waited just beyond the next mountain pass. But so did more danger. More enemies. More people who wanted her dead before she could become everything they feared. Kaya touched the brand on her shoulder through her cloak. The mark Marcus had left to remind her she was property. That she belonged to someone else. That she could be hurt and no one would care. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She was a frost wolf. A king's mate. And maybe, just maybe, the subject of a prophecy that could change everything. She just had to survive long enough to figure out what that meant. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks lost in clouds and darkness. Somewhere up there, the moon goddess's shrine waited. And Kaya was done running from her destiny. Whatever it cost, whatever it demanded. She would face it, because the alternative, staying weak, staying afraid, staying the girl in the cellar, was no longer an option she could accept. The cold wind cut through the pass, but Kaya barely felt it. The winter was calling to her. Her power was waking. And the world, whether it was ready or not, was about to discover what a frost wolf could become when she finally stopped being afraid of her own strength. The shrine revealed itself at dawn. They'd ridden through the night, pushing past exhaustion and the lingering adrenaline from the attack. The bound wolves stumbled behind them, guarded by Commander Theron's unwavering vigilance. But as the first rays of sunlight crested the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold, the ancient structure emerged from the mist like something out of a dream. It wasn't what Kaya expected. She'd imagined something grand, pillars and archways, carved stone, and elaborate decorations. Instead, the shrine was simple, almost humble. A circular clearing ringed by standing stones, each one taller than a man and covered in symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the morning light. At the center stood a single altar, hewn from black stone that absorbed the sunlight rather than reflecting it. And the cold. The cold here was different. Not the harsh, biting winter of the mountains, but something older.
Deeper.
It wrapped around Kaya like a familiar embrace, making her wolf surge with recognition and something that felt almost like homecoming. "This is it," Damien said quietly, dismounting. His breath misted in the frigid air, but his eyes were fixed on Kaya. The shrine of the first winter, built by the frost wolves millennia ago, before the purge, before they were hunted to extinction. Kaya slid from her horse, her legs unsteady. The power radiating from this place was overwhelming, not threatening, but vast. Ancient, like standing at the edge of an ocean and feeling the pull of tides older than memory. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. "I don't know," Damien admitted. "The legends say the shrine recognizes those of the frost wolf bloodline, that it will awaken something, but they're vague on the details." Theron secured the prisoners to a tree at the clearing's edge, well away from the standing stones. Garrick was awake now, his eyes fixed on the shrine with an expression caught between fear and hatred. "You're a fool," he called out to Damien. "You bring her here, You unleash something you can't control. The frost wolves were destroyed for a reason. Their power was too great, too unstable. They couldn't be trusted with it. Maybe they couldn't be trusted because people like you made them your enemies, Kaya shot back, surprising herself with the sharpness in her voice. Maybe if they'd been allowed to exist in peace, they wouldn't have been a threat. Garrick laughed, bitter and harsh. Peace? They were weapons, girl. Living weapons that could freeze entire armies, could bring winter to lands that had never seen snow. And when they were crossed, when they were angered, he shook his head. There's a reason the old stories are filled with frozen corpses and villages buried in ice. The words should have frightened her, should have made her hesitate. But instead, Kaya felt that anger rising again, the same fury that had let her create the ice wall, that had made her power surge. Maybe they had good reason to be angry, she said quietly. Damien's hand on her shoulder was gentle but grounding. Ignore him. He's trying to get in your head, trying to make you doubt yourself. His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. Whatever happens in there, whatever you discover, I'm here. You're not alone in this. Kaya looked up at him, at the king who turned his realm upside down searching for her, who defended her in court and sat watch over her nightmares and looked at her like she was something precious even when she felt broken beyond repair. What if he's right? She whispered. What if I can't control it? What if I become something dangerous? Then we figure it out together, Damien said simply. Kaya, I've seen dangerous. I've been dangerous. Power doesn't make you a monster. It's what you choose to do with it that matters. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. And I trust you to make the right choices. The faith in his voice undid something in her chest. All her life, people had either feared her or tried to suppress her. No one had ever simply trusted her, believed in her ability to choose wisely, seen past the broken exterior to whatever potential might be hiding underneath. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Neither do I, Damien said. But we're going to figure it out anyway. He released her, stepping back to give her space. Theron stood at the clearing's edge, alert and watchful. The bound wolves were quiet now, watching with fear and fascination as Kaya turned toward the shrine. She walked forward slowly, her feet crunching through snow that sparkled like diamond dust. With each step, the power grew stronger, not threatening, but welcoming, calling to something deep inside her that had been sleeping too long. The standing stones towered over her as she passed between them. Up close, she could see the symbols carved into their surface were more complex than she'd thought. Not just decorative, but a language. Ancient and beautiful and somehow familiar, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. She reached the altar at the center and stopped. The black stone was smooth, polished by centuries of wind and weather. There were no instructions, no obvious place to kneel or offerings to make. Just the stone and the silence, and the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Now what? She called back to Damien. I don't know. Trust your instincts. Instincts.
Right.
Because her instincts had been so reliable lately. Her instincts told her to stay small, stay quiet, stay hidden where it was safe. But maybe those weren't her instincts. Maybe those were Marcus's lessons, beaten into her over 3 years until she couldn't tell the difference between wisdom and trauma. Kaya took a breath and placed her hands on the altar. The world exploded. Not physically. Nothing moved, nothing changed in the clearing behind her. But inside her mind, inside her soul, something vast and ancient unfurled like wings she'd never known she possessed. Images flooded her vision. Memories that weren't hers, but somehow belonged to her anyway. She saw wolves running through snow that fell in sheets, their coats pure white, their eyes burning silver. Saw them calling winter itself, pulling storms from clear skies and ice from warm earth. Saw them protecting villages from threats. Saw them standing as guardians at the borders between the mortal world and something darker. Something hungry. She saw a woman, tall and regal, with hair like moonlight and eyes like Kaya's own, standing on this very spot. saw her raise her hands and call down power that made the mountains tremble, saw her smile, fierce and joyful and utterly unafraid. And she saw the purge, saw wolves who weren't frost-blessed turning on those who were, saw accusations of witchcraft, of unnatural power, of being too dangerous to live, saw frost wolves hunted through forests and mountains, saw their numbers dwindle, saw them making desperate last stands to protect their children, their mates, their way of life, saw them fail, saw the survivors scattered, hiding, trying to suppress their power to survive, saw bloodlines diluted over generations until the frost wolf abilities became dormant, sleeping, waiting for someone strong enough, or desperate enough, to wake them again. Saw her mother's face, young, laughing, with the same silver eyes. A frost wolf who'd hidden her nature, who'd found love with a wolf who didn't carry the bloodline, who'd hoped their daughter might be normal, might be safe. But power like this didn't skip generations.
Didn't disappear.
It just waited. And Kaya had been the one it chose to wake in. The visions faded, leaving her gasping, her hands still pressed to the altar. Tears streamed down her face. Grief for the frost wolves who'd died, grief for the mother who'd tried to protect her, grief for the girl she'd been before Marcus had taught her to fear her own nature. But underneath the grief was something else. Understanding. She wasn't a mistake, wasn't a monster or an aberration. She was the heir to an ancient legacy, the carrier of magic that had protected the realm for millennia before fear and ignorance had tried to destroy it. And that magic was waking up. Kaya lifted her hands from the altar and watched as frost spread from her fingertips, racing up her arms in delicate, beautiful patterns. Not hurting, not burning, just existing, being what it was meant to be. She turned back to the clearing and found Damien frozen in place, his eyes wide. Behind him, even Theron looked stunned. Kaya, Damien breathed. Your eyes. She could feel it, the change. Her eyes were glowing now, bright silver like the wolves in her visions. Like her mother's eyes. Like the frost wolf she was always meant to become. I understand now, she said, and her voice echoed strangely, layered with power. I know what I am, what we were, why they feared us. Tell me, Damien said, moving toward her slowly. We weren't just wolves with ice magic, Kaya said. We were protectors. Guardians against darkness. The frost wolves could sense it, whatever's coming from the north, whatever the prophecy warns about. My ancestors stood against it for centuries. That's why we had so much power. We needed it. She looked down at her hands, at the frost still clinging to her skin. And when they killed us, when they drove us to extinction, they removed the realm's first line of defense. Damien had gone pale. The darkness in the north. The thing I can feel but can't name. The frost wolves were supposed to fight it, Kaya finished.
Yes.
That's what we did. What we were made for. She met his eyes. And now, there's only me. One frost wolf, untrained and barely in control of her power, standing against something that took entire packs of my ancestors to contain. The weight of that realization was crushing. The prophecy wasn't about her being some chosen one who would save the day. It was about her being the last desperate hope of a dying bloodline, expected to do what hundreds of frost wolves had once done together. You're not alone, Damien said fiercely, closing the distance between them. You have me. You have Theron. You have the entire realm's military at your disposal. And you have time to learn, to train, to become.
Doi. Kaya asked.
Do we have time? Because that's not what I felt in there, Damien. I felt urgency. Desperation. Whatever's coming, it's close. And I'm nowhere near ready to face it. She expected him to argue, to try to reassure her with false promises. Instead, he took her frosted hands in his without hesitation, his warmth meeting her cold. Then we make you ready, he said simply. However long it takes, whatever resources we need, we make you ready. But Kaya, you need to promise me something. What? You won't face this alone. You won't try to be the martyr, to sacrifice yourself because some prophecy says you're supposed to. Whatever's coming, we face it together.
As mates.
As partners. His grip tightened. I didn't spend 8 years searching for you just to lose you to some noble sacrifice. The fierceness in his voice, the raw emotion, cracked something open inside her. This man, this king, was offering her something she'd never had.
Partnership.
Equality. A choice in her own destiny. I can't promise I'll survive, she said quietly. I can't promise I'm strong enough. I'm not asking you to promise success, Damien said. I'm asking you to promise you'll fight. That you won't give up. That you'll let me stand beside you instead of trying to protect me by pushing me away. His eyes searched hers. Can you do that? Could she? Could she let someone in, truly in, when everyone she'd ever depended on had either died or hurt her? Looking at Damien, at the vulnerability and strength in equal measure on his face, Kaya realized she wanted to try. Yes, she whispered. I promise. The tension in his shoulders eased. He pulled her closer, careful but intentional, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. When she didn't, when she let herself be held, he wrapped his arms around her and pressed his forehead to hers. Thank you, he murmured, for trusting me, for giving us, a chance. They stood like that for a long moment, her cold and his warmth finding equilibrium, her frost and his fire creating something new between them. Kaya could feel her wolf settling, content in a way she'd never experienced. The mate bond, dormant until now, began to hum with recognition and rightness. This was what was supposed to feel like. Not ownership or possession but partnership. Two halves of a whole, different but complementary. We should return to the capital, Theron said, his voice carefully neutral but tinged with urgency. The prisoners need to stand trial, and every hour we're out here is another hour for the Northern Alliance to send reinforcements. Damien pulled back slightly, but kept one arm around Kaya's waist. He's right. We've gotten what we came for. Now we need to get you somewhere safe while you learn to control this power. Nowhere safe, Garrett called from his bonds. You think your capital can protect her? You think stone walls and guard patrols matter against what's coming? The Frost Wolves failed once. She'll fail too. And this time, there won't be anyone left to rebuild after the darkness consumes everything. Ignore him, Damien said, but Kaya could see the worry in his eyes. He felt it too, the urgency, the sense that time was running out faster than they could prepare. As they mounted their horses and began the journey back, Kaya looked back at the shrine one last time. The standing stones stood silent, the altar dark and waiting. How many Frostwolves had stood where she'd stood? How many had received the same visions, the same understanding of their purpose? And how many had died trying to fulfill it? The frost on her hands had faded, but she could still feel the power there, waiting. Vast and terrifying and hers. She just had to learn how to wield it without destroying herself in the process. What are you thinking? Damien asked, his horse falling into step beside hers. That I have no idea what I'm doing, Kaya admitted. That I'm terrified I'll fail. That everyone's counting on me to be something I don't know how to be. That sounds exhausting, Damien said with a small smile. Want to know what I'm thinking? What? That you faced the shrine and didn't run. That you looked at your power and didn't reject it. That you're brave enough to admit you're scared instead of pretending to be fearless. He reached over and took her hand. That's all I need from you right now, Kaya. Not perfection. Not some predetermined destiny. Just you, trying your best, letting me help. His hand was warm in hers. Grounding.
Real.
Okay, she said. I can do that. They rode through the mountain pass as the sun climbed higher, leaving the shrine behind but carrying its revelations with them. Behind them, Garrick and his wolves marched in bitter silence, their failed assassination attempt guaranteeing trials and executions. But ahead of them, more danger waited. More enemies who would see Kaya as a threat to be eliminated. More battles in a war that was only just beginning. Kaya squeezed Damien's hand, feeling the mate bond pulse with warmth and certainty. She wasn't ready for any of this. Wasn't prepared for the weight of prophecy or the responsibility of being the last frost wolf. But she wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see her through whatever darkness was coming. The mountains watched them pass, ancient and indifferent, keeping their secrets. And somewhere in the far north, beyond the abandoned territories and forgotten borders, something stirred. Something that had been waiting for the return of the frost wolves. Waiting to finish what the purge had started. Waiting to test whether one broken girl with newly awakened power could stand against the darkness that had taken entire packs to contain. The answer remained to be seen. But Kaya was done running from her destiny. Whatever it cost, whatever it demanded, she would face it, with a king at her side and the legacy of her ancestors burning cold in her veins. The frost wolf had awakened, and the realm would never be the same. The capital welcomed them back with celebrations that felt more like a warning. Word of Garrick's failed attack had somehow reached the city before they did, and the story had been twisted, reshaped, weaponized. According to the rumors spreading through the streets, the king had been ambushed by Northern Alliance assassins while protecting his mysterious new ward, a girl with strange powers who had single-handedly defeated a dozen wolves with unnatural ice magic. Some called her a hero. Others called her a threat. Most just watched with fearful eyes as Kaya rode through the gates beside Damien, and she could feel their judgment pressing down like a physical weight. "They're afraid of me," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that only Damien could hear. "They're afraid of what they don't understand," he corrected. "Give them time. Once they see you're not a threat, once they understand what you can do for the realm." "Will they, though?" Kaya interrupted. The frost wolves were guardians once, and it didn't save them from the purge. Fear doesn't need facts, Damien. Just excuses. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew she was right. The palace was in chaos when they arrived. Servants rushed through hallways with urgent messages, guards stood at doubled posts, and the air hummed with tension that made Kaya's skin prickle. Something had happened while they were gone. Something bad. Commander Theron disappeared immediately to deliver the prisoners to the dungeons and make his report to the guard captains. That left Kaya and Damien alone in the entry hall, surrounded by the organized pandemonium of a court in crisis. "Your Majesty." A thin man in formal robes approached, his face pinched with stress. "Thank the goddess you've returned. The council has been in emergency session since yesterday. They're demanding your presence immediately." "What happened?" Damien's voice was sharp, commanding. "It's complicated, Your Majesty. Perhaps it's best discussed in the council chambers." "Tell me now, Aldrich." The thin man, Aldrich, glanced at Kaya with barely concealed distaste. "The Northern Alliance has formally accused you of harboring a dangerous magical threat. They're calling for the girl to be surrendered to them for its evaluation." Kaya's blood went cold. "Evaluation. They claim you pose a threat to regional stability," Aldrich continued, still addressing Damien as if Kaya wasn't standing right there. "That your abilities are uncontrolled and potentially catastrophic. They've demanded you be turned over within 7 days, or they'll consider it an act of war." "Let them consider it whatever they want," Damien said flatly. "Kaya is my mate and under the crown's protection. She's not going anywhere." Aldrich's eyes widened. "Your mate?" He looked at Kaya again, and this time his expression held something worse than distaste. "Horror. Your Majesty, surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what I said. Kaya is my fated mate. That makes her untouchable by law, by tradition, and by my personal decree. Anyone who suggests otherwise can take it up with me personally." The threat in Damien's voice was unmistakable. Aldrich paled. "Of course, Your Majesty. But the council, they're concerned. About the implications. About what it means for the realm to have a frost wolf as queen. The council can voice their concerns in session," Damien said. "Where's Lady Evelyn? I want Kaya settled in her chambers with proper security before I deal with the politicians." "Lady Evelyn is," Aldrich hesitated. She's been relieved of her duties, Your Majesty, by order of the council in your absence. The silence that followed was dangerous. They did what? Damien's voice was deathly quiet. The council felt that with the current situation, all household staff should be vetted. Lady Evelyn's loyalty was questioned, given her close association with Miss Kaya. She's been confined to her quarters pending investigation. Kaya felt sick. Lady Evelyn, who had been nothing but kind to her, was being punished for showing her basic human decency. Because the council had decided Kaya was a threat. Because fear had made them cruel. The council overstepped, Damien said, each word precise as a blade. They have no authority to relieve my household staff or confine anyone without my direct order. And they sure as hell don't have the authority to question my mate's associations. He turned to Kaya. Stay here. I need to remind some people exactly who rules this realm. I'm coming with you, Kaya said immediately. Kaya. If they're making decisions about me, I deserve to face them. I'm tired of being discussed like I'm not in the room, like my existence is something to be debated by people who've never even met me. She lifted her chin. You said we were partners. That means I don't hide while you fight my battles. Something shifted in Damien's expression. Surprise, then respect, then something that looked almost like pride. All right. Together, then. But Kaya, the council chamber is going to be hostile. They're going to say things that hurt. Attack you in ways I can't always defend against without making things worse. I survived 3 years with Marcus, Kaya said quietly. I can survive some politicians. His smile was fierce. That's my mate. They walked through the palace together, and Kaya tried not to notice how servants pressed themselves against walls to avoid her, how whispered conversations died when she passed, how fear followed her like a shadow. This was her life now. Being the girl everyone was afraid of, everyone wanted gone. Everyone saw as a problem to be solved. The council chamber doors were massive, carved oak that depicted the history of the realm in intricate relief. Guards stood at attention, their faces carefully neutral as Damien pushed the doors open without announcement. The 7 council members sat in their elevated seats, arranged in a semicircle around a central speaking floor. They were all old wolves, gray-haired and weathered, with the kind of power that came from decades of political maneuvering. Kaya recognized a few from Marcus's trial: High Chancellor Corvin with his frost-white beard, Lady Sabine with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, Lord Valen whose territory bordered the Northern Alliance. They all looked up as Damien entered, and their expressions ranged from relief to apprehension to barely concealed hostility. Your Majesty, High Chancellor Corvin said, standing. Thank the goddess you've returned safely. You've been making decisions in my absence that you had no authority to make. Damien cut him off. Starting with relieving Lady Evelyn of her duties. Explain.
Now.
Corvin's face tightened. Your Majesty, we acted in the best interests of the realm. With the threat of war from the Northern Alliance, we couldn't afford to have household staff who might be compromised. Compromised how? Damien demanded. Lady Evelyn has served the crown for 30 years without a single question of her loyalty. What exactly changed? Her close association with that girl, Lady Sabine said, her voice dripping with disdain as she gestured at Kaya. She's been seen entering her chambers multiple times, showing her favor, acting as if the girl is someone important rather than a potential threat we should be containing. That girl, Damien said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is my mate. Her name is Kaya, and she is someone important, the most important person in this entire realm, according to the laws you claim to uphold. The council chamber erupted. Your Majesty, you can't be serious. A frost wolf as queen? It's unthinkable. The bloodline is cursed, everyone knows. Enough. Damien's voice thundered through the chamber, and the sheer force of his alpha command made every wolf in the room flinch into silence. I am your king. I don't answer to you.
You answer to me.
And I am telling you that Kaya Thorne is my fated mate, recognized by the moon goddess herself. Anyone who questions that is questioning the goddess's judgment. Is that what you're doing? Questioning divine will. Silence. Heavy and uncomfortable. Lord Valen was the first to speak, his voice careful. Your Majesty, we mean no disrespect to you or to the goddess. But the fact remains that the girl possesses dangerous abilities. Abilities that were deemed too unstable to exist, which is why the Frost Wolves were eliminated centuries ago. Bringing one back, elevating her to queen, the implications are staggering. The implications, Kaya said, her voice cutting through the tension, are that maybe your ancestors made a mistake. Maybe they killed the Frost Wolves not because we were dangerous, but because we were powerful and they were afraid. All eyes turned to her. She could feel their judgment, their fear, their barely concealed hostility. But she'd promised Damien she wouldn't hide. Wouldn't let him fight alone. You don't know what you're talking about, girl, Lady Sabine said dismissively. You're a child playing with forces you can't possibly understand. I understand that the Frost Wolves were guardians, Kaya shot back. That they protected the realm from darkness for centuries before your ancestors decided to murder them. I understand that whatever's coming from the north, whatever you can feel building in the abandoned territories, the Frost Wolves were supposed to fight it. And I understand that by killing them, your ancestors left the realm defenseless against something that's about to wake up. The council members exchanged glances. Uncomfortable. Uncertain. The girl speaks of prophecy, High Chancellor Corvin said slowly. Old legends about darkness from the north. Your Majesty, surely you don't give credence to such. I give credence to reports from my scouts, Damien interrupted. Reports that say the temperature in the far northern territories has dropped 30 degrees in the past month. That entire forests are dying, frozen solid despite it only being early winter. That wolves who venture too far north don't come back. That something is moving in the darkness up there, something our patrols can't identify and won't engage. He paused, letting that sink in. The prophecy might be old, but the threat is very real. And Kaya is the only advantage we have against it. Or she's part of it, Lord Valen said quietly. How do we know this isn't what the darkness wanted? To have a frost wolf inside our walls, close to the king, ready to strike when we're most vulnerable? The accusation hung in the air like poison. Kaya felt the anger rising again, felt her power stirring in response. The temperature in the chamber dropped noticeably. Frost began forming on the stone floor beneath her feet. How dare you, she said, her voice layered with power. I have done nothing but survive what your people did to me. My parents were murdered to keep me weak. I was beaten and starved and locked in darkness for 3 years by one of your own council members. And now you have the audacity to suggest I'm the threat. You're proving our point, Lady Sabine said, gesturing at the spreading frost. You can't even control your emotions without your power lashing out. What happens when you're truly angry? When you're threatened? How many innocent people will you freeze in your tantrum? The word tantrum was meant to belittle, to reduce her fear and rage to something childish and dismissible. It worked too well. Kaya's control slipped further. The frost spread faster, climbing the walls, covering the council members' seats in delicate ice crystals. Kaya. Damien's voice was calm, steady.
Breathe.
They're trying to provoke you. Don't give them what they want. He was right. This was a test. A trap. If she lost control here, in front of the council, she'd prove every fear they had about her. Would give them the excuse they needed to demand her removal, her imprisonment, maybe even her execution. She closed her eyes and reached for the meditation techniques Damien had shown her during their journey back. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. Find the center where the power lived and pull it back, contain it, control it. The frost stopped spreading. The temperature stabilized. When Kaya opened her eyes, she was calm. Better, she asked Lady Sabine, her voice steady. Or should I prove I can control it by demonstrating exactly how much damage I could do if I chose to lose control? The threat was clear. So was the restraint. Lady Sabine paled but said nothing. The council's concerns are noted, Damien said coldly. But here are the facts. Kaya is my mate. She's not leaving. She's not being surrendered to the Northern Alliance. And she's going to be trained to use her abilities properly, with or without your approval. The only question is whether you're going to support your king, or whether you're going to continue undermining him and proving that the Northern Alliance was right to question our unity. It's not that simple, Your Majesty, High Chancellor Corvin said heavily. The Northern Alliance isn't making empty threats. They have military superiority in numbers. If they declare war over this girl— Over my mate, Damien corrected. Over your mate, Corvin amended. We'll be fighting a war on multiple fronts. Against the Alliance from the west, against whatever's coming from the north, and possibly against internal dissent from wolves who agree that frost wolves are too dangerous to tolerate. Then those wolves are welcome to leave my realm, Damien said flatly. I won't rule through fear and persecution. I won't repeat the mistakes of the past just because it's politically convenient. Noble sentiments, Lord Valen said. But Your Majesty, you're young. You haven't seen what war truly costs. Your father understood the necessity of difficult choices, of sacrificing individual desires for the greater good of the realm. The mention of Damien's father made his expression shudder. My father's reign ended in a mysterious death that's never been properly investigated. Forgive me if I don't consider his judgment infallible. The council members exchanged glances again, and something passed between them. Something that made Kaya's stomach knot with fresh dread. Perhaps, High Chancellor Corvin said slowly, we should discuss that very topic. Your father's death, and the circumstances surrounding it. What are you talking about? Damien's voice was careful now, controlled. Your father died 8 years ago, Your Majesty. Heart failure, the official report said. Sudden and unexpected. Corvin's ancient eyes were sharp, calculating. But there were irregularities. Investigations that were quietly buried. Questions that were never answered. Get to the point, Damien growled. The point, Your Majesty, is that your father was investigating rumors of Frost Wolf survivors. He'd received intelligence that suggested the bloodline wasn't as extinct as everyone believed. And 3 days before his death, he ordered a full inquiry into the original purge, who ordered it, who carried it out, and whether it was justified. Corvin paused, letting that sink in. He died before that inquiry could begin. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Kaya's mind raced. Damien's father had been investigating the Frost Wolves, had died mysteriously right before he could expose the truth. Which meant, you're saying someone on this council had my father killed, Damien said, his voice deathly quiet. To protect the secret of the purge. To keep the Frost Wolves buried. We're saying, Lady Sabine interjected, that your father's death might not have been the natural causes everyone assumed, and that bringing a Frost Wolf into the heart of the realm, elevating her to a position of power, might be exactly what his killers were trying to prevent.
Who?
Damien demanded. Who killed him?
We don't know, Corvin said.
The investigation was buried. The records destroyed. But Your Majesty, if someone on this council, or elsewhere in the government, was willing to kill a king to keep the Frost Wolves extinct, what do you think they'll do now that you've brought one back? Now that you've made her your mate and announced your intention to make her queen? The implication was clear. Kaya wasn't just in danger from the Northern Alliance. She was in danger from someone inside the palace. Someone powerful enough to kill a king and cover it up. Someone who was probably in this room right now. This is why we urged caution, Lord Valen said. Why we acted in your absence to secure the palace and vet the staff. We're not your enemies, Your Majesty. We're trying to protect you. And her. Whether she believes it or not. Kaya looked at the 7 faces arranged above her. 7 old wolves with decades of secrets and political power. One of them, or more, had killed Damien's father. Had orchestrated the purge centuries ago or was protecting those who did. Had probably ordered her own parents' deaths. And now they sat there, pretending to care about her safety while setting the trap that would justify her removal. You're lying, she said quietly. Maybe not about the king's father. but about wanting to protect me. You want me gone. You want the frost wolves to stay extinct. And you'll use whatever excuse you can find, war with the Northern Alliance, threats to stability, concerns about control, to make that happen. Believe what you want, girl, Lady Sabine said coldly. But the fact remains that you're a liability. To the king, to the realm, to yourself. The kindest thing we could do is send you somewhere safe. Somewhere isolated. Where you can't hurt anyone and no one can hurt you. You mean a prison, Kaya said. We mean protection, Corvin corrected. For everyone involved. Damien moved then, placing himself between Kaya and the council with deliberate intent. This conversation is over. Kaya stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it up at the next formal session, where their objections will be noted and ignored. He turned toward the door, his hand finding Kaya's and gripping it tight. And, Chancellor Corvin? Find me everything that still exists about my father's death investigation. Every scrap of paper, every witness report, every piece of evidence that wasn't destroyed. I want it on my desk by tomorrow morning. Your Majesty. Tomorrow morning, Damien repeated, his voice brooking no argument. They left the council chamber to heavy silence and hostile stares. The doors closed behind them with a finality that felt like a death knell. They're going to kill you, Kaya said as soon as they were in the corridor.
Or me.
Or both of us. They practically admitted it in there. I know, Damien said grimly. Which is why we need to move faster. Train harder. Figure out who we can actually trust before the assassins come. Before? Kaya laughed. The sound bitter. Damien, they already came. Garrick was just the first attempt. The council has probably authorized 3 more by now. He didn't argue. Couldn't. They both knew she was right. They walked back to the royal wing in tense silence, guards falling into step around them. But Kaya couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger wasn't outside the palace walls. It was inside, walking the same corridors, sitting in positions of power and respect. Her parents' killers, Damien's father's killers, and now, probably, her own future killers, all hiding behind titles and tradition while they orchestrated murder to protect their secrets. The frost wolves were supposed to be extinct, and someone was determined to keep it that way. Even if it meant killing the last one. Even if it meant killing a king who refused to let her go. The trap was closing, and Kaya had no idea how to escape it. The attack came 3 nights later, during the new moon when darkness was absolute and the palace guards changed shifts. Kaya woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of screaming. For a disorienting moment, she was back in Marcus's cellar. Back in the nightmare where fire meant punishment and screaming meant someone was dying. Then her wolf surged to alertness, and reality crashed in with terrifying clarity. The palace was burning. She threw herself out of bed, her bare feet hitting cold stone as she ran to the window. Orange light flickered across the courtyard below. Not the whole palace, just the east wing. The servants' quarters. Where the fire would spread slowly enough to be contained, but fast enough to create chaos. A distraction. The realization hit her at the same moment her chamber door exploded inward. 3 wolves burst through, already shifted, their eyes glowing with predatory intent. They were larger than normal, enhanced somehow, and they moved with the coordinated precision of trained killers. Kaya didn't think, just reacted. Ice erupted from the floor, a wall of frozen defense that caught the first wolf mid-leap. He slammed into it with a yelp, stunned but not down. The other 2 split, circling, looking for openings. Where was Damien? Where were the guards who were supposed to be protecting her? The second wolf lunged from her left. Kaya threw out her hand and ice spikes shot from the floor, forcing the wolf to twist midair to avoid being impaled. He landed hard, snarling, already gathering himself for another attack. The third wolf was the smart one. Instead of attacking head-on, he went for the window, trying to cut off her escape route, trap her in the room where the numbers favored them. But Kaya had spent 3 years in a cellar learning how to fight from corners, how to make small spaces work for her instead of against her. She dropped to the floor as the first wolf recovered and charged. He sailed over her, crashing into his packmate by the window. Before they could untangle themselves, Kaya sent a sheet of ice racing across the floor, so slick and smooth that when the second wolf tried to charge, his paws found no purchase. He went down hard, sliding into the wall with a satisfying thud.
The door.
She needed to reach the door, needed to find Damien, and figure out what the hell was happening. She ran, ice spreading from her footsteps, making the floor treacherous for anyone trying to follow. Behind her, the wolves were scrambling, regrouping. She could hear more sounds from the corridor, fighting, shouting, the clash of weapons and the snarls of wolves locked in combat. Kaya burst into the hallway and nearly collided with Commander Theron. His sword was drawn and bloody, his armor scored with claw marks. Behind him, 3 bodies lay sprawled in various states of dismemberment.
Guards.
Her guards.
Dead.
Thank the goddess, Theron gasped. Are you hurt?
No.
Where's Damien? His chambers. Under attack. They hit us simultaneously. Fires in the East Wing, assassins in the royal quarters, and he cut himself off as more wolves appeared at the corridor's end. At least 6 of them, all enhanced, all coming fast.
Run.
Get to the king. I'll hold them here. You can't hold 6. I said run. Kaya ran. The palace had become a nightmare of smoke and shadows. She passed more bodies, servants, guards, even a council member she didn't recognize. Blood stained the elegant carpets. Tapestries hung torn and burning. The seat of power for the entire realm was under siege, and she had no idea who was winning. Damien's chambers were at the far end of the royal wing. The door stood open, one hanging off its hinges. Inside, the sounds of combat were deafening. Kaya skidded to a stop in the doorway, and her heart nearly stopped. Damien was in the center of the room, partially shifted, his hands elongated into claws and his eyes burning gold. He was holding off 5 wolves at once, moving with deadly grace that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. Bodies littered the floor around him. He'd already killed at least 10, but more kept coming. And standing at the far end of the room, watching with cold calculation, was High Chancellor Corvin. You, Kaya breathed. Corvin's ancient eyes shifted to her, and something that might have been regret flickered across his face. I'm sorry, child. Truly. But some mistakes cannot be allowed to persist. The Frost Wolves were eliminated for good reason. Bringing you back threatens everything we've built, everything we've protected for centuries. You killed Damien's father, Kaya said, pieces clicking into place. You killed my parents. You've been orchestrating this from the beginning. I protected the realm, Corvin corrected. From threats you're too young to understand. The Frost Wolves weren't just guardians. They were conquerors. Tyrants who used their power to subjugate normal wolves, to enforce their will through fear and violence. The purge was necessary, merciful even. You're lying, Kaya spat. Am I? Then why do all the old stories speak of frozen armies and villages buried in ice? Why were our ancestors so desperate to eliminate the Frost Wolves that they risked civil war to do it? Corvin shook his head. The prophecy you're so eager to fulfill? It doesn't speak of salvation, girl. It speaks of a choice. Save or destroy. And I've spent my entire life ensuring you'd never have the chance to destroy. Damien had heard them talking. His attention wavered for just a second, distracted by the revelation that the man who'd served as his advisor for years was his father's killer. That second was all the assassins needed. 2 of them struck simultaneously, claws raking across Damien's back, drawing blood. He roared in pain and fury, spinning to retaliate, but the damage was done. He was wounded, tired, outnumbered. And Corvin was smiling. Something inside Kaya broke. Not in the way Marcus had broken her, small and afraid and convinced of her own worthlessness. This was different. This was a breaking free. A shattering of every chain that had ever held her back, every doubt that had ever made her question her worth, every fear that had ever made her small. The Frost Wolves had been guardians. Her mother had been a guardian. and Kaya was done letting murderers and liars tell her she was the monster. The temperature in the room plummeted. Not gradually. Not controllably. One moment it was winter cold. The next it was Arctic. Breath froze in the air. The blood on the floor crystallized. The windows cracked from the sudden temperature shock. And Kaya let her wolf out. She'd been suppressing her for so long, keeping her locked away because Marcus had taught her that shifting was dangerous, that her wolf was wrong. But her wolf wasn't wrong. She was magnificent. The shift hurt, it always hurt, but this time Kaya embraced the pain. Let it fuel the transformation. Bones broke and reformed. Muscles tore and regrew. Skin split and sprouted fur so white it seemed to glow in the firelight. When the shift completed, Kaya stood on 4 paws, and her wolf was everything the legends had described. Massive. Easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with a coat of pure white that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her eyes burned silver, bright enough to cast their own illumination. And from her paws, frost spread in intricate, beautiful, deadly patterns. The assassins attacking Damien stopped, turned, and for the first time since they'd entered the room, Kaya saw fear in their enhanced eyes.
Good.
She wanted them afraid. The first assassin who'd recovered from his shock lunged at her, probably thinking size meant slow. He learned his mistake too late. Kaya was on him before he'd closed half the distance, her jaws closing around his throat. She tasted blood and rage, and 3 years of suppressed fury, and when she threw the body aside, it was already freezing solid. The remaining assassins scattered, but there was nowhere to run. Kaya was between them and the door, and behind them, Damien had recovered enough to press his own attack. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. Kaya moved through the assassins like winter itself, beautiful and merciless and absolutely unstoppable. Where her paws touched, ice spread. Where her breath blew, the air turned to frost. She froze one wolf solid mid-leap, the look of shock permanently etched on his face. She brought another down with claws that left trails of ice in his flesh, the cold spreading through his veins until his heart stopped. She was death in a white coat, and she was done apologizing for it. Within minutes, it was over. The last assassin fell, and silence descended on the destroyed chamber. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls, some bleeding, some frozen, all dead. Kaya stood in the center of the carnage, her sides heaving, her white coat splattered with blood that was already crystallizing. Her silver eyes found Corvin, who had backed against the far wall, his aged face pale with terror. "Wait," he gasped.
Please.
"I was only trying to protect." Kaya growled, and the sound was nothing human. It was the promise of winter, of death, of justice 3 centuries overdue. She stalked forward slowly, deliberately, letting him feel every moment of approaching doom. He'd killed her parents, killed Damien's father, orchestrated the purge that had destroyed her entire bloodline, spent decades ensuring the Frost Wolves would never rise again. And now he would face what he'd created. Kaya. Damien's voice cut through her rage. He'd shifted back to human form, one hand pressed to the bleeding wounds on his back, but his eyes were clear.
Concerned.
"Kaya, stop." She paused, her jaws inches from Corvin's throat. "He deserves to die," Damien continued, moving closer. "I won't pretend otherwise. But you're not a killer, Kaya. Not like this. Not in cold blood. Don't let him make you into the monster he always claimed you were." The words penetrated the red haze of her fury. She wanted to kill Corvin. Wanted to feel his life end beneath her jaws. Wanted justice for her parents and for Damien's father and for the hundreds of Frost Wolves who died in the purge. But Damien was right. Killing him like this, while he was helpless and afraid, wouldn't make her a guardian. It would make her an executioner. Would prove that everything the council feared about Frost Wolves was true. With effort that made her whole body shake, Kaya pulled back. She shifted to human form, a process that was faster now, more natural, like her wolf was finally comfortable being called, and stood before Corvin in her torn nightgown, blood-splattered and furious, but in control. You're going to stand trial, she said, her voice steady despite the rage still coursing through her. You're going to confess everything. The murders, the purge, all of it. And then you're going to spend whatever's left of your miserable life in a cell, thinking about the lives you destroyed because you were too afraid to let someone different exist. Corvin laughed, bitter and broken. You think a trial matters? You think confessions and justice will change anything? The Northern Alliance still wants you dead. Half the council still fears you. And the darkness in the north doesn't care about your moral high ground. He met her eyes. I may have failed tonight, but others will come. They'll keep coming until you're dead, or until you prove me right by becoming the tyrant I always knew you'd be. Then let them come, Kaya said coldly. I'm done hiding. Done being afraid. Done letting people like you decide what I'm allowed to be. She looked at Damien. The fires. Being contained, he said. Theron sent word. Minimal casualties in the servants' quarters. Most were evacuated in time. And the other council members? In protective custody. Assuming they weren't part of this. His expression darkened. We'll find out soon enough. Guards appeared in the doorway, Theron leading them, wounded but alive. They took Corvin into custody, binding him in chains that looked far too heavy for an old wolf, but somehow seemed appropriate. As they dragged him from the room, he looked back at Kaya one last time. The prophecy says you'll choose. Save or destroy. Remember that, Frost Wolf. When the darkness comes, when you have to make the choice, remember that I tried to spare you from it. Then he was gone, and Kaya was left standing in the destroyed chamber with Damien and the aftermath of the worst night of her life. You are incredible, Damien said softly, moving to her side. Terrifying and powerful, and everything I knew you could be. I almost killed him, Kaya admitted. I wanted to kill him. If you hadn't stopped me. But I did. And you listened. That's what matters. He took her blood-stained hands in his. You had every right to take his life. Every justification. But you chose mercy. That's what separates guardians from tyrants, Kaya. The ability to choose. Kaya looked down at their joined hands. His warm, hers cold. His human warm, hers frost-blessed. Different but somehow right together. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild. We root out the rest of the conspirators. We prepare for whatever's coming from the north. He lifted her chin, making her meet his eyes. And we do it together. As mates. As partners. As a king and his Frostwolf queen.
Queen.
The word should have terrified her. But standing there, covered in the blood of enemies she defeated, her wolf settled and content for the first time in her life, Kaya found she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. For the trials. For the darkness. For whatever destiny had in store. Because she wasn't the broken girl from the cellar anymore. She was Kaya Thorne, the last Frostwolf. A king's mate. And anyone who tried to make her small again would learn the same lesson Corvin had learned tonight. Winter had returned to the realm. And this time, it was here to stay. Through the broken windows, dawn began to break. The fires were dying. The assassins were dead. The traitor was in chains. And somewhere in the far north, beyond the abandoned territories, the darkness felt the return of its ancient enemy. The frost wolves were supposed to be extinct, but prophecies had a way of making liars out of history. And the final battle, the choice between salvation and destruction, was only just beginning. The morning after the attack, Kaya stood on the palace balcony overlooking the capital, watching the city wake to news that would change everything. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost obscene against the backdrop of smoke still rising from the east wing. Below, in the courtyard, servants worked to clear the debris while guards patrolled with doubled vigilance. The palace had been breached. The illusion of safety had been shattered. And everyone knew why. Her. The frost wolf who had returned when she was supposed to stay dead. The girl who had dared to be the king's mate. The living reminder that some bloodlines refuse to die quietly, no matter how many times people tried to eliminate them. Kaya could feel their eyes on her even from this distance.
Fear. Curiosity.
Anger.
Hope.
All of it directed at her like she was the answer to questions they didn't know how to ask. "You're up early," Damien's voice came from behind her. She heard his approach. He'd stopped trying to move silently around her, had stopped treating her like something fragile that might break. "Couldn't sleep? Sleep feels like a luxury I can't afford anymore," Kaya said quietly, not turning from the view. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them. The assassins.
The blood."
Corvin's face when he told me I'd have to choose between saving the realm or destroying it. Damien moved beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He was still bandaged from last night's wounds, but he moved without wincing. Kings didn't show weakness, even when they were hurt. "Corvin was trying to manipulate you," Damien said. "Trying to make you doubt yourself one last time. What if he wasn't, though?" Kaya turned to face him, and she knew her eyes showed the fear she'd been trying to hide. What if the prophecy really is a warning? What if I am supposed to choose, and what if I choose wrong? "Then we deal with it together," Damien said simply. "Kaya, you stood in my chambers last night with a traitor who'd killed your parents, who'd orchestrated genocide against your entire bloodline, who deserved death more than anyone I've ever known. And you chose mercy. You chose justice over vengeance. If that's not proof that you can be trusted with impossible choices, I don't know what is." "That was easy compared to what's coming," Kaya said. Corvin was one old wolf who'd already lost. But the darkness in the north. "Damien, I saw it. In the visions at the shrine. It's not just an enemy you can fight with swords and strategy. It's something ancient. Something that took entire packs of frost wolves working together to contain. And now there's just me." "No," Damien said firmly, taking her hands. "There's us. You keep forgetting that part. You're not alone in this." "You can't fight what's coming," Kaya said, and her voice broke slightly. "Normal wolves can't. That's why the frost wolves existed in the first place. We were the only ones who could stand against it. And when they killed us off, when they eliminated the one defense the realm had," she pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself. "They doomed everyone. And now they expect me to fix it. One untrained frost wolf against something that used to require hundreds." The weight of it was crushing, suffocating. Last night, in the heat of battle, she'd felt powerful, unstoppable. But now, in the cold light of morning, she just felt small, inadequate, like a girl playing at being something important while the real threat loomed ever closer. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely a whisper. "I'm terrified that I'm not enough, that I'll fail, and everyone will die because the goddess chose wrong, because the prophecy was about someone else, because I'm just a broken girl who got lucky with her genetics." Damien was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with an honesty that made her chest ache. "I'm scared too," he said. "I'm terrified that I'll lose you. That some assassin I didn't see coming will succeed where Corvin failed, or that the darkness will take you from me, or that you'll sacrifice yourself because you think that's what the prophecy demands." He moved in front of her, making her look at him. "I'm terrified that I found you too late, that the 3 years you spent in that cellar broke something I can't fix, that you'll never fully trust me because every man with power in your life has hurt you." Tears burned in Kaya's eyes. "Damien. But I'm also hopeful," he continued. "I'm hopeful because I see you getting stronger every day. I see you standing up to council members and facing down assassins and choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. I see the woman you're becoming, and she's extraordinary, powerful,
Brave.
everything the frost wolves were supposed to be, and more." His hands cupped her face gently. "So yes, I'm scared. But I also believe in you. In us. In the possibility that maybe the goddess knew exactly what she was doing when she chose you." The tears spilled over. Kaya let them fall, let herself be vulnerable in a way she'd never allowed before. "What if I disappoint you?" "Impossible," Damien said softly, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "You could never disappoint me. Frustrate me? Absolutely. Terrify me with the risks you take?
Daily.
But disappoint me? Never. You exist, Kaya. You survived what should have killed you. You're here, standing with me, trying your best to be ready for something no one should have to face. That's enough. You're enough. The words broke something open inside her chest. Some last wall she'd been holding up, some final defense against letting herself fully believe she deserved this. Deserved him. Deserved a chance at something that wasn't just survival. She kissed him. It wasn't planned. Wasn't calculated. Just a desperate need to show him what she couldn't find words for. Gratitude and trust and the terrifying, wonderful realization that somewhere between the court and the shrine and last night's battle, she'd fallen for him. For the king who looked at her broken pieces and saw potential. For the mate who gave her space to heal and power to choose and faith when she had none in herself. Damien made a surprised sound, then pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. It was gentle but intense, warm meeting cold in a way that felt like balance, like rightness, like two halves of a whole finally recognizing each other. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I know it's too soon. I know you might not be ready to hear it. But I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever choices you have to make, whatever darkness comes, I love you, and I will stand with you until the end. Kaya's breath caught.
Love.
The word she'd stopped believing in after her parents died. The concept Marcus had beaten out of her. The thing she'd thought she'd never deserve or receive or understand. I don't know if I know how to love, she admitted. Marcus took that from me. Made it so I can't trust the feeling, can't believe it's real when someone offers it. Then we'll figure it out together, Damien said. Just like everything else. One day at a time. No pressure.
No expectations.
Just thus. Learning how to be mates and partners and maybe, eventually, something more. Below them, the capital continued waking. The palace continued healing. The realm continued turning, unaware that their fate rested on the shoulders of a girl who still wasn't sure she was strong enough to carry it. But maybe that was okay. Maybe being unsure didn't mean being unworthy. Maybe doubt was just another form of wisdom, the understanding that great power required great care, and that fear of failure was better than the arrogance of assumed success. The Northern Alliance will send their response today, Damien said, pulling back slightly. To our refusal to surrender you. It won't be peaceful. Let them come, Kaya said, and this time, she meant it. Let them all come. I'm done running. Done hiding. If they want me dead, they'll have to face me themselves. Damien's smile was fierce, proud. That's my queen.
Queen.
The title still felt foreign. But maybe, with time, it would feel like hers. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist. Somewhere in the north, the darkness waited. Somewhere in the palace dungeons, Corvin sat in chains, his conspiracy unraveling as Theron interrogated the other conspirators. Somewhere in the realm, wolves were choosing sides, those who would stand with their king and his frostwolf mate, and those who would fight to eliminate the threat she represented. The war was coming, not just with the Northern Alliance, but with the darkness itself. The ancient evil that the frost wolves had been created to fight. The choice the prophecy spoke of, save or destroy, loomed on the horizon like a storm she couldn't avoid. But standing here, with Damien beside her and her wolf settled and strong within her, Kaya found she wasn't as afraid anymore. She was still terrified, still doubtful, still scarred by 3 years of abuse and a lifetime of being told she was wrong. But she was also powerful.
Loved.
No longer alone. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The question remains, haunting as winter wind. Would you have chosen her side? When the girl from the cellar became the Frost Wolf Queen, when the broken thing became the realm's last hope, when the scared and scarred survivor stood up and said no more, would you have believed in her? Or would you have been one of the voices calling for her death, for her exile, for her silence? Would you have seen the power and been awed, or seen the power and been afraid? Would you have trusted the king who loved her, or joined the council that betrayed him? Would you have stood beside her when the darkness came, or hidden behind walls and waited for someone else to save you? The prophecy speaks of a choice, save or destroy. But maybe the real choice was never hers to make. Maybe it was always ours. Hers was simply to survive long enough to become who she was meant to be. Ours is to decide if we deserve the salvation she offers, or if we'll repeat history's mistakes and destroy the very thing that could save us. Because that's the truth about heroes, isn't it? We demand they rise. We expect them to sacrifice. We need them to be perfect, and then we tear them down the moment their power makes us uncomfortable. Kaya is no longer the girl in the cellar. She is frost and fury, winter and warning, the last of a murdered bloodline and the first of a new beginning. She is flawed and powerful and trying her best in a world that wants her dead for daring to exist. She is loved by a king and feared by a realm and standing at the edge of a darkness that could consume everything. And the question, the one that will haunt you long after this story ends, is simple. Is she a hero? Or just a girl cursed with too much fire, too much ice, too much expectation? The answer, like most truths, isn't comfortable. It's complicated. It's human. It's the story of everyone who's ever been told they're too much or not enough, too different or too broken, too powerful or too weak to deserve the space they take up in the world. And if this story lit something inside you, recognition or rage or hope or hunger for more tales that burn with truth, then subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, in this space, we don't tell pretty lies about perfect people. We tell stories about survivors who become warriors, about the broken who become whole, about girls in cellars who become queens of winter, about love that's messy and complicated and real.
Subscribe.
Because Kaya's story isn't over. The darkness is still coming. The choice still waits. And you deserve to know how it ends. Or maybe how it begins. Frost glittered on the balcony railing where Kaya's hand had rested. Below, the capital prepared for war. Above, storm clouds gathered, not from nature, but from the north, from the place where ancient evils stirred and waited. And in the palace, a king and his frost wolf queen stood together, two halves of a whole, facing the impossible with nothing but each other and the desperate, defiant hope that love and power combined might be enough to save a realm that had never deserved saving. The story continues. The choice remains. Will you be there to witness it? Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. The winter has only just begun.